So I think it'll be kind of interesting if we like debrief at the end of each season, like the way that season 1 is like, I think 300 pages, maybe 200 pages. It's 282. And if season 1 is 282, can you imagine how many
Ooh,
pages season 3 is going to be?
I cannot. I do not want to.
Season 1 is 119, 20-ish thousand words. Season 3 is 570 something thousand words. So like
Oh, it's going to be
it's
like
going to be like,
700 pages at least.
yeah, it's going to be like bigger than like fucking Middlemarch, or what's like the longest book ever written. It's going to be bigger than that. Okay, hello, people out there, listeners out there.
Hi, hi.
I'm Maggie,
I'm Maddie.
and this is.
Ambition Unpacked.
Yeah, it is. All right, we are on our second episode, which technically is kind of like our first episode because the first one was an introduction episode. So we are actually officially now talking about the show.
Woo. I mean, we were already talking about the show, but now we're talking about things that actually happen in the show.
Yes, the literal actual words of the literal actual non-real show. We also spent like an hour before this recording tweaking all of our equipment and doing some IT technical troubleshooting. So hopefully it'll sound really good. And if it doesn't, too bad. You guys have to
Yeah.
choose to listen to it. I was saying this to you obviously when you were going through it, but when I would join the thing that we're using to record, I would have to like kind of jump out and jump back in when Maddie joins, because when Maddie joins, she suddenly sounds like a little hamster. Like it like takes her voice and distorts it, so it's like, and I'm like, I can't understand a word you're saying. But now she sounds great and amazing. So we can have a great and amazing conversation, not like chipmunks.
But kind of like chipmunks in the sense that we are like excitable and like enthusiastic about the subject matter, which is,
That's
of
true.
course, ambition.
Ambition. So yeah, we're talking about the pilot episode, the very first. It is called First Impressions, open parenthesis, pilot, close parenthesis. With a lot of shows, you know, the first episode is called pilot, and that's because in Hollywood, the first episode that you use to sell your show or to put it out there for the networks to decide if they want to use it are known as pilot episodes. Like, you know, pilot as a word means like starter or the first or whatever. So in a lot of ways, it's like most episodes, even if they have a different title, are also known as the pilot. A lot of shows will choose to just be like pilot. I don't care. I'm not naming it. I like to name my pilots and then put it in parentheses pilot because I think they should get their own title. I think they should have their own
Yeah.
fun little thing, because if it's just pilot, it's boring and indistinctive. So that's my little history lesson. Really not very in-depth history lesson, but if you've ever noticed like why is all these first episodes called pilot? That's why.
Yeah. I remember noticing that when I was like 12 and I was watching, I think I was like rewatching Gilmore Girls for the second time or something. And I was just like, Dad, why is it called pilot? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And then we Googled it and we found out.
Yeah, it's like there's no pilots in this show. This isn't
Yeah.
about an airplane. Why is it called that? Our title here that is special is First Impressions. And, you know, as one could assume, I think it's a bit of a literal, you can kind of obviously see why it's picked, because it's the first episode. It's our first impression, both for Riley going into this world. This is how she's first seeing all these people. And it's our first impression as the audience of what is this show going to be? Who are these characters? What is this world? And so it's not the deepest, most layered, like, ooh, cool name, but it means something. It gets the job done.
I mean, it could be an homage to Pride and Prejudice's original title.
Is that what it was called?
Yeah, it was originally called First Impressions. That's a fun fact for you from an
Oh,
Austen fan.
that's so
Um,
interesting. Yeah, I should say, you know, we have Pride and Prejudice themes throughout the show, especially with one particular duo that they're kind of
mhm.
thematically tied to it. I have never read it. I don't really know anything about it. I've seen the 2005
Yes.
movie.
Yes. Mhm.
But otherwise, it's like S is the one who like knows all about that. And so when we're planning out these things, she'll be like, "Oh, and that's related to Pride and Prejudice, and we can use that." And I'm like, "Great! I love a theme. I love a motif. amazing. But I like don't personally know much of anything about it.
And look at you. You named the first episode after it. So it's all
Yeah,
there.
let's pretend that was intentional and I did that on purpose. No, yeah, the only thing that I am really connected to with Pride and Prejudice is that its soundtrack from the 2005 movie is one of my favorite soundtracks. It was I think my second top listened to album this past year.
Mm,
And part of that is because when I write Ambition, I will listen to that soundtrack a lot, actually.
that's beautiful.
Especially, it was especially in the UK episodes, I listened to it a crap ton because of
Hmm.
that. Like, we were at, Peak District and we were at, all these places that are tied to a lot of the stuff in that property. So it was very fitting for the emotion. I think it's just, I would if anybody likes scores, if you like movie scores, I would recommend that one. It has a lot of good, beautiful moments and ebbs and flows and good emotion for any moment that you need it. With this title, to be completely honest, this is one of those ones that was just like, this works. It's fine. It fits what it needs to do. It didn't really have especially because it was the first one, and I think even with the writing, as we'll talk about in this first half of the season, S and I are kind of just like, well, whatever. Like, we were just throwing stuff out there. We will see a lot of that in just talking about the differences between the original version of this and the rewritten version, which is one of the unique things I think about this episode and our conversation that we're going to have as different from when we analyze other episodes, is that this one does have an original version that
Hmm.
is very, very different in some ways from the new version that I created. So the first original version, for people that have been here since the beginning, they know this episode aired April 30th, 2019. That was when it dropped. I can remember where I was. I was at my internship. I literally posted it while at work. People maybe should not do that, but I did that.
I support it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I was not getting paid, so it's fine.
Exactly.
This one, I think we put it out there. If people remember in season one, like, we did not really have schedules in season one. It was not like what we built it into in season two, where it was every week we do one. And then after that, it was
Mm.
every other week we'll post one because they started to get really long. But this one was posted April 30th, 2019, and its original word count. We have word count and we have runtime. And maybe I should explain what goes into that when we post those things, because, we like to pretend this
Mm.
is a TV show. And word count obviously is just how many words are in it. And that includes the slug lines, which is like, if we'll say the location, that's what a slug line is the exterior, interior, like all that kind of stuff. It includes that in the word count. We basically have this document that kind of translates an equation of word count to minutes. And when the episodes were shorter, I believe it was like every 500 words was a minute. So we
Hmm.
would start at like, okay, 5,000 words is 42 minutes because that's a very standard runtime for a TV show. And then you
Hmm.
just go up and up and up. Obviously, that changed because the episodes got longer and longer. So now our current way of doing it is that it's every 1,000 words goes up 1 minute. So you can
Oh.
have, like, our current pilot is quote unquote 47 minutes. The shortest episode is quote unquote 44 minutes. And then I think the longest is up at like 80 or something like that. I think 312 was 81. So you can see there's like a very wide range of
Hmm.
runtimes here. But the sheer difference, which is what I wanted to get to, the original version of the pilot was 5,612 words,
Hmm.
very, very, very short, and was quote unquote 43 minutes. And then the revamped, the new one that we are going to do most of our discussing about,
Hmm.
is 9,969 words,
Wow.
and it is a runtime of 47 minutes on the new scale. So it doubled basically in size almost.
Yeah.
And that's just like very crazy to me, is to even think back to the fact that there are episodes that are that short. To me is like, huh?
Yeah. You just churn them out. Like
Yeah.
now I'll talk to you and you're writing it for so long and then, but it's also because it has a lot more depth now.
Yeah, and a lot more just people and things and storylines and places and all that stuff.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's like looking back at this original pilot, I I'm just like, when I was reading it, we did different methods where Maddie read the new one first and then went back and read the original. And what I did was I read it at the same time, basically. So I would read through the new one and then I would cross check with the old one to see, like, did something change? Is there a missing scene? I was doing the comparative version of it and reading. I just like make myself laugh because I'm reading the old one and I'm like, I did not give a shit. Like, I'm like, here's some
Yeah.
bullet points to explain what's going on. You're like reading my outline. This is not, who cares? And so, like, in a way, it's nice because it's like clearly we really were just like throwing this out there for fun and we just wanted to get started. And I think there's a cuteness and a authenticity to that, but at the
Mhm.
same time, I'm like, me of today would be like, oh my god, like, this is whew. So I think that kind of even goes to show why we even have a revamped pilot, because I just felt that going into season 3 where we have this really cool reader base and people are really invested and committed, and I just kept thinking, like, if I were a friend and my friend told me, hey, check out Ambition, and I went and I checked out Ambition and I was reading that original pilot, I'd be like, why is this 3 seasons? Is all of the episodes gonna be like this? So I wanted to go back and like do a little more justice to that first episode, since it's what hooks you in if you're gonna get hooked. And I wanted to make it feel a little
Mhm.
more the way that season 2 and season 3 feel. So that's kind of why it even came to be in the first place.
That's really interesting as well because, when they make the pilot of a lot of shows, like, I'm mainly thinking about Gilmore Girls just because I've rewatched it so many times that I really notice all the differences between the pilot and the next episode, they often film a pilot in a different setting because they haven't,
Yeah.
like, nailed down the actual setting, and so, like, all the set looks different, and there's walls where there's later not walls, and there's, like,
Right.
characters that then don't appear ever again or get renamed or recast, and it's interesting because it almost feels like you went back and, like, reshot the pilot with, like, the eventual set and everything.
Yeah, I love that comparison. Yeah, the reason also that pilots tend to be or feel so different is because, talking about that same thing of pilots are called pilots because they're the first and that's how you sell them, is because oftentimes, like, they'll film the pilot and then while they're waiting to figure out if they're going to go to series, it's like they have to wait months sometimes. So that's why, like,
Yeah.
if you think about the source material, like Girl Meets World, right? Like, they actually filmed
Mhm.
2 pilots, I believe. But even between the pilot of Girl Meets World and the second episode of Girl Meets World, it's like you see it, I think, most in Peyton because he's a boy and boys age like at the speed of light.
Mhm.
So like he still looks young, but he looks even younger in the pilot than he does in the second episode, and it's because there was a time gap between when they filmed
Yes.
them. So that's part of it too, is that when they're waiting to see if they get picked up. So all those sets are temporary. It's like, we're just filling this in. We want to get this going. And then, yeah, once they get the season pull or the series pull, then it's like, oh, okay, we can actually build the sets we're gonna live on for
Yeah.
a little bit.
I feel like that's what it kind of is with the revamped pilot. I mean, you've got the set, you know how to, like, how you go about describing things, and there's more somewhat nuance and, like, effort put into the later ones, so then you just go back and, like, provide that sort of emotional funding to the pilot.
Right. It's a different kind of a funding is a good word. Yeah. We're
Exactly,
like,
yeah.
okay, we've actually stuck with this for 3 seasons now. So let's go back and give that a little bit of love when we didn't know if we were gonna keep writing it. So
Exactly.
that's fun. That's cute. So the next thing that we said we would do is we would look at the synopsis and we would talk
Mhm,
about what does that set up? What does that make us think? What has it all got in there? This one, I think, admittedly, since it is the pilot, it's kind of setting everything up. It's not as intrigue as later seasons are when we're trying to like hint at, ooh, what should I be worried about? What should I be thinking about? So this one is the curtain rises. Riley Matthews is looking for a new start and the chance to pursue her dreams. AAA seems like the perfect place, save for the diva antics, the brooding crew of techies, and the Jewish American golden boy willing to kill for his claim to the spotlight. Welcome to Adams.
I mean, it sounds honestly a little bit darker than it actually, although I did write this in my notes, this episode is tense, and
Mm-hmm.
I was about to say the synopsis seems darker than the show, but then actually now that I'm thinking about it, I mean, you don't really get the sense that people are gonna, like, murder each other, but, um yeah, it's a tense episode, and it kind of does go with that synopsis of it says kill and brooding and antics. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting start, but I suppose it does get a bit dark sometimes, but I do tend to think of it as a more upbeat show than that.
I think it is really interesting when we talked about, for example, when they were trying to decide, where is Glee gonna fit at, the awards, like the Emmys or the not the Grammys, but
Mhm.
like Golden Globe stuff like that. And comedies are often paired with musicals, even if the
Mhm.
musical itself is not funny. So
Yeah.
Glee was one that was intentionally more comedic. It was a comedy. That was what was pitched as.
Yeah.
Ambition, I think, does not. It's definitely a dramedy. It does not really
Yeah.
fit into either or, because I agree that I think it definitely, as we know and we come to know and we continue to know, it has its heavy moments and its
Mhm.
really emotional wallops, I would say. But overall, and this at least is my intention, so I hope it feels this way, it's still a hopeful show. And it's a
Mhm.
show that its heart is very light, and it wants to, it's kind of like you have the good and the bad, and there's always going to be good and bad, but the show ultimately is trying to go towards the message of like there's always good too, and you just have to
Yeah.
find the good. So
Yeah.
yeah, and I think it's interesting, this synopsis, spoiler, obviously this is not a spoiler free podcast, but there's two things that I think are kind of interesting. The Farkle's description, we don't know it's Farkle yet, of course, but willing to kill for his claim to the spotlight, I think that is it's a good hint for what's going to come for him throughout this season. Specifically, what we know happens in the end of the season is kind of, he's set up as this, like, we gotta watch him, and you sure do.
Yeah, but also it's dark, but, who is he willing to kill? It does not say.
Yeah, that's it.
It's a
Uh-huh,
it's an
uh-huh, I see what,
interesting
uh-huh.
mm, mhm,
A wink, a wink. You're right. Yep. And then the other piece that I think is interesting is that, it mentions Riley is looking for a new start and the chance to pursue her dreams. I think when you hear dreams and you think art school, you think about Maya, you think about Zay, you think about these people
yes,
who have this dream of performing. And I
yes.
would say that's not really Riley's dream. And her
No,
dream is more, which we'll talk about a little bit as we go through the episode, but her dream is more about belonging. And I think that you don't know that
yeah.
at this point, obviously, because she seems like, oh, she's going to this art school. I guess she really wants to be a performer. But it's like, does she? Well, we'll find out.
Yeah, it's definitely not something you're aware of at this point, or even I think it is quite subtle, over the course of all the seasons. Like, you
Hmm.
can kinda gather that over time, but it doesn't necessarily come across until you read really into her character.
And I can say, ring the little bell, ring the Maggie's being ominous bell. Not really ominous. It's not like a threat, but I'm alluding, I'm foreshadowing, I'm doing something. We'll have to come up with a, what's the best word for that. But basically that idea of her character will continue to be an undercurrent for her, but I think will become more important in this coming
Ooh.
season of season 4. So, keep that in mind. Keep it in the
This is
back of
where
your brain.
yeah, the hot gossip is on the stove, yeah.
It's piping hot. Before we jump into the episode here, which I'm excited to do, I wanted to also say, just as a kind of fun fact, that so this episode obviously is the first episode in the show. It's the first episode that got put down on paper, but it was not the first thing that I wrote of Ambition. The
Ooh.
first thing that was actually written out and then basically stayed in that form for the most part was, fast forwarding, spoiler to the end of season 1, is the Louvre sequence. The Lord, when Maya leaves the Casal audition to when Farkle has his monologue about I want a team, that whole thing, that was the first thing I ever wrote of Ambition.
Woo.
And the reason that I think that stands out to me so much and is still, I mean, it's one of the most iconic moments in the show, I think.
Truly,
But part
truly.
of it was just that when S and I were discussing all these things and we had talked about that episode, it was just so clear in my head that I just went and I wrote it in screenplay format too. It was written like a TV script. And it was just, I wanted to get that out there and put it on the page. And so Farkle's monologue, it was really, that was what I was really writing towards. And that was really the first thing that was ever written. And I think that we will talk a lot more about that when we get to that episode, but I think it's
Mm-hmm.
telling that that was the first thing I wrote because there's a lot
Yeah.
of the show's core in that monologue.
Yeah, it's good to have that goal that you're working towards and then almost to work backwards from that.
Right. So, speaking of working
Mm.
backwards and going back to the beginning, to clarify, we're going to be basically talking about the revamped pilot as it stands, but we will be comparing it to retroactively the original if when necessary.
Mm-hmm.
So, that kind of is what we start off with here because there's this sequence now at the beginning of an advertisement for AAA. And this, while I think is now very crucial to the pilot and is a
Mm-hmm.
very kind of iconic piece of it, because as we know, it comes back later in the show as well. And I think it kind of is just a really good entry point. The original did not have this, it did not have
No,
anything like this.
we just got dropped in, really. We
Yep.
just no intro, no context. We just go in and we don't even know like who Jack is, really.
We don't know who Jack is. We even jumping in with Riley, we don't know who Riley is. It's like
Mm-hmm.
I said, like I look at this pilot, the original, and I just laugh to myself because I was like, eh, it doesn't matter. Put it out there. It's fine.
Yeah.
And you can, I think, really see, like, I was like, no, this needs a much sharper opening. We need a much more kind of clear little entry point sense. And then I think one of the things I like about this opening is the fact that it sets us up to find Riley
Mm.
because it says at the end of in Jack's little rehearsed little speech, he says at the end, like, do you have what it takes? Who are these people who want to come to this school? And then we meet one and we jump right in with
Oh.
Riley. So I think that it just the revamped pilot is revamped for a reason. Let's just start with
Mm-hmm.
that, and that will continue to be a theme as we go through this.
It's true. Um, the first thing I notice, honestly, is imagining Jack giving his little rehearsed speech that he is so diligently practiced for this. He just seems so different to when we get to know him. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's almost like hiding some panic and keeping it all together. Like this comes
Yeah.
across the whole episode. He's just like this sort of like fragile being of like, is it all going well? I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, that's one thing I actually wrote as well. I wrote that basically I think the setup for this with this advertisement is both a good entry point, but it also in a way is meant to be ironic because it's like this is the first thing we see and it's our first impression. But then we
Mhm.
very quickly learn even in the first episode that it is not what it seems. And
Yeah.
not only is Adams not what it seems, but Jack is not what he seems in that initial introduction, where he seems very polished and very put together and very
Yeah.
unfazed. And I think that that's one thing that is one of my favorite things about the revamped pilot, and kind of, I think, a big part of why I wanted to do a new one, is that it
Yeah.
kind of sets up Jack with the importance that I think he deserves. Like in the first
Mm.
version, he like was just there, right? Like he was just the
Yeah.
administrator and that was his thing and that's fine.
Yeah.
But I think that especially in the arc of the first 3 seasons, being at the school, Jack is such a beating heart at the center of that for as much as the
Yeah.
characters don't necessarily see him that way at first. And I wanted to give a little more space for him. Like, what is the emotional struggle that he's going through? It's not easy to have this job. It's not easy to be in this position. And I think I wanted
Mhm.
to have not only be Riley's story at the beginning, but also Jack's story, because he does kind of drive, I think, a lot of the elements of the show.
That is the pros to going back later on. There are some things that are so different that it was almost shocking just to read back and go, "Oh, they really were different."
I feel like I know one piece that you're talking about, and we'll definitely talk about this. Are you kind of hinting at Jack and Eric?
Exactly. Yes.
Yep,
That is
yes.
exactly
The
what I
way
was
that
hinting at.
they the way that they interact so early on is really, we're so immersed in season 3 and it's such a different vibe there, but yeah, they
Mhm.
did not like each other. They were very
It
Eric
was
especially.
it's antagonistic, like It's insane. I wrote the cat fight in my notes. I wrote Eric in all caps, the cat fight. Like, they're just trying to destroy each other at this point,
Yeah.
basically.
One thing I love about it too is, this episode is about first impressions, and it's kind of the irony of those first impressions. One thing I love about it is the fact that, we know and think of Eric as like very supportive, this very nice guy, like it to everybody. Like, and I think that that is really what his core is, but everybody has their less than pleasant sides. And I love that this episode now kind of goes back and shows that, like, no, Eric was definitely a catty theater kid when he was a teenager, because he
Yeah.
is so like talking behind Jack's back and like
Mm-hmm.
turning everybody against him because he doesn't like the way he runs things, which is a huge irony considering when you get to season 3, he's fighting for Jack tooth and nail. He's like, no, Jack needs to
Mm-hmm.
be at this school. And it's just so
Mm-hmm.
fun. It's so fun, to go back and be like, oh, damn.
Damn,
Wow.
this was a different time. Everyone was a little tense for different reasons.
Yes. So fun. I have some notes about that as well. So as we go through, we'll touch on them. One other thing I just wanted to say
Okay.
about this beginning introduction thing is
Mm-hmm.
this idea that the first character that we meet is not even Jack. It's really AAA, because that's the first
Oh.
shot we get. That's the first establishing feeling we have. It
Mm-hmm.
comes up on the screen, like the letters, like, and I think that it really is a character all its own.
Mm-hmm.
The school is so fundamental to the first 3 seasons of the show
Yeah.
that, in a way, now that we've graduated from that in the series, it is kind of like we lost a main character
Oh.
in a way. Or
Yeah.
maybe we haven't lost them. Now they're just like guest star. They're like Dylan and Asher. They're like, okay, you might see us every once in a while, but we're about this now. We
Yeah.
don't need to be mains anymore.
Yeah. Grown up.
Yeah, they're all grown up. Ones I have highlighted here in his speech that he gives is
Mm-hmm.
when they're talking about what do they do at Adams. They're going to hone their craft, they're going to explore the field. He says they're going to learn from one another as well as highly skilled educators. And I think
Mm.
that that is ironic in a way, because as we
Mm-hmm.
know, we get a lot of jokes and comments about how the teachers at AAA maybe are not the best. They're not high quality, amazing. I mean, shout out to Mr. Norton, the science and math teacher, because he seems to be doing his best. But I mean, Corey gets knocked all the time.
As he should.
Sean Sean is a storyline where he's not a great teacher. Angela's distracted by her own dreams and her own pettiness. I really think, like, when Harper shows up in season 2, she's kind of like the first where it's like, oh, this is like a really good teacher.
Yes.
Not just a good performer, but a good teacher.
Exactly.
So for him to be like, oh, highly skilled educators, well, are they? But if you gotta sell it, you gotta sell it.
We'll just pretend. Yeah, you gotta.
Another piece of irony that I pointed out is in the text section in the prose of this video, there's a point that it says, all of the students are thrilled to be there, working hard, laughing and smiling with one another. And as we know, when
Mm.
Riley gets into this situation, that is not the case for the A class.
Not at all. That is fake.
It's just really, that I think is one of the biggest moments of like, this is a facade. This is not, we're selling AAA. This is not the
Mm-hmm.
reality of AAA.
Exactly.
Then in his last kind of little line here, I highlighted, and this comes back later. I realized as I kept reading, I was like, oh, I'm so smart that I put this later because it's important.
Mm.
He has his line that the competition is fierce and the process isn't easy. It's work, hard work, but any passion worth pursuing takes a little faith and a whole lot of elbow grease.
Mm.
And that line, to me, I highlighted in purple,
Ooh.
and purple is my color for series themes. And I think that that line is something that the idea of that comes back again and again and again in the show, about if you really care about something, how much work do you put into it? How
Mm-hmm.
willing are you to compete? How willing are you to stick with it? And that's kind of the first introduction right there, right at the very beginning.
It's something that even in season 3, like, it's still being examined, like,
Mm-hmm.
every single episode, which is really cool to see that it just continues through, and it really has, I mean, it's in the name, ambition. Like, what does it mean? How do you get there?
And then also in that line, he is a green highlight for Girl Meets World. He says, "The best of the best make their way to Adams, and without a doubt, the best emerge from it, ready to take on the world." But kiss.
I didn't even catch that. Wow.
And since I only wrote this version of it a year ago, it's like, yeah, that was intentional. I did that as a little wink. It was on purpose. Just for the girlies out there. So then we go into our first ever song. And I think this kind of comes back to that thing of me elevating Jack and really wanting to see him as more.
Mhm.
You see this in the original as well, that he and Riley split this song. They're
Mm.
the first two people to sing in the show. And I think that it's noteworthy that Jack is the first person to sing in the show, but he does not sing that often.
I
So,
wrote that down too. That is exactly what I wrote in my notes. I said, "It's so cool that Jack gets to sing first." And this first song is really epitomizing the vibes of the whole episode, but also the show. It just
mhm.
feels right.
It's funny to me that I've had people pick on me like, oh, like this is from Shrek 2. And I'm like, listen, first of all, Shrek 2 soundtrack, banger.
Exactly.
Second of all, I just love the vibe of it. It's like not too heavy, but it does have these themes in it that are very, I think, poignant. And
Mhm.
like you said, they kind of carry throughout. Like there's the phrase that's like turning and facing the strange and walking into change, and time may change me, but I can change time. Like it's just this idea of, I think, interacting with your own
Yeah.
destiny, even if it's changes. And I think that that is so big in the show. So I think
Uh-huh.
it's a fun first song to have. And I love
Yes.
that, like you said, like Jack does not sing much, but I think that the fact that he does have the first one despite not singing much shows that when people sing in this show, it's for a reason. Even
Mhm.
if they're characters who sing all the time, even if they're characters who rarely sing, if they are singing, if we chose to give them a song,
Mhm.
it was for a reason. And I think for him in this moment, he was the one that I wrote down, like his verse is very interesting,
Mhm.
because it's like, I watch the ripples change their size, never leave the stream. And then he says later, like, these children that you spit on as they try to change their world, they're immune to your consultations, they're quite aware of what they're going through.
Mm.
And I think for him, the first part is that he's been now here at Adams for what, like 10 years, and so he's seen everything before, or so he thinks he's seen everything before, and
Yeah.
everything is always the same. Obviously we know that's not true, because as we go on in the series, everyone is like, the sophomore A class is insane, the
Yes.
junior A class they're weird, I don't know what's wrong with them, it's a very weird crop of people. But I think just that he's coming in from that kind of jaded viewpoint, and then that changes over time. But also this idea of, they're immune to your consultations, they're quite aware of what they're going through, shows that Jack, I think in one phrase, is, like I said, jaded and kind of exhausted by the fact that he's trying to reach characters. We see this later in a specific scene, but he's trying to reach out to these students, and he's just hitting walls, hitting walls, hitting walls, but also acknowledging the fact that he knows that they know what they're doing, that they know what situations they're in. They're not naive. They're not, like, they know what they're getting themselves into. It's just, how do those two generations meet on the same page? And I think that that is an interesting thing about this song.
Exactly. Yeah, it's the right tone as well because it's sort of upbeat, but it's also kind of melancholy.
Mm-hmm.
That suits the episode, which is just like oddly tense.
Speaking of that, I highlighted in this version if there were distinct changes from the original.
Mhm.
Because the way that I wrote the new version was, I literally took the original and then I built on top of it. So it wasn't like I completely started from scratch. And I wanted to see, like, even in places where if I wasn't adding a whole new scene, if it was just the same scene, like, did I add more? And I think that that did happen most consistently with performances. Thank God for that. But in this original one with Riley here, it starts with her. We're jumping in right with her at the beginning, and she's that who's gonna go to Adams, who's the kid who's gonna do it. In the original one, it was really just more about her excitement.
Mm.
Like, she was like, "Oh, first day of AAA, let's go, wee!"
Yeah.
But in the new version, there's a whole thing about, from how anxious she looks, it seems like she hasn't slept much at all. But then she smiles, forcing herself to focus on the excitement. So
Mm.
it kind of conveys more of her insecurity. rather than it just being about, oh, I'm so excited to go to Adams, we can get a little more of a sense of what she might be cautious about, what she's grappling with. And I think kind of plays to her character as well, that we see Riley do this a lot in the show,
Mm.
where she is the person who forces herself to look at the positive, is the one who tries to be optimistic. I think she says at one point in season 2, if I don't play that role, no one will. And I think that we see that even from the beginning, that she's like, okay, I'm freaked out, but I'm gonna pull myself together, and I'm gonna go through it, and I'm gonna have fun, and I'm gonna do the best I can. And I think that you see that even right from the beginning.
And that is why, as I have in my notes, Riley is the cutest, most adorable gal, but also the strongest.
So true. So true. Then there's another little detail that was added here, that when we see on her home screen, her home lock photo is a photo of her and her younger brother, but neither parent is featured in the
Mm,
photo. That was not in the original. So you can see there's a little more, I think, just intentional planting of certain little details.
yeah.
You get that visual of AAA again, seeing it, I think, maybe less from the beautiful cinematic perspective and more from, I'm standing on the stairs looking up at this daunting building.
Mm. Do you know what it makes me think of? I always think of, like, have you seen House of Anubis? I don't think you have.
No, but you told me a lot about
Well,
it.
just in the credits, like, the credits start with, like, Nina, the main girl, like, going up to the house, and then she just, like, she
Hmm.
walks up to it, and then she, like, turns around, and she, like, looks up at it, and it's, like, this kind of dramatic shot, and I always think about that because it feels very Riley in that moment, like, starting her new school,
Hmm.
and she's looking at this intimidating big building, and yeah, it would be very intimidating because the way it's described is actually, like, very dramatic. I just there's not schools like that in New Zealand, so
I don't really think that there is a building quite like that actually in the middle of New York, but I know that there are schools that are built similarly, just because, like, depending on when it was built,
mm,
if it's been there for a long time, like, it could have been, in my head, I think I kind of have this backstory assumption to myself that Adams as a building was not always a school. Like,
yeah.
I think maybe it was some kind of performing arts center, or just some two
Mm,
theaters that maybe got merged at some point, and so it became this building. I
mhm.
don't think it was always in its past life as a character. I don't think it was always a school, but it does feel different than a school does. Yes, we're in the school. Jack does his line, his beautiful moment. Then we have both of them, basically, Riley and Jack, walking through the school. And this is when we start getting a little glimpse of some other people that might be important.
Mm.
These are our, one might say, first impressions.
I wrote in my notes, I wrote, "Did you notice that Farkle is dramatic? Did you get that he's a diva?" In case it wasn't clear. Um,
No
and
way. You think people got that? I don't know. I feel like it was a little subtle.
he's yelling, and then I wrote, "Maya being all fancy SMH."
Yeah, I think this is, well, the first thing I wrote was that me comparing it to the original, I was literally dead laughing at the fact that I literally just wrote bullet points.
Mhm.
I was like, here's all these characters, whatever. I'm glad that I changed that in the new version and that it reads more like a traditional episode. The amount of bullet points in that first episode literally kills me. I think it's hilarious. I took a few notes as we saw them. The first thing that I said, since we see who we meet first, we meet Zay and we meet Charlie. I think it is a little eyebrow raise, a little noteworthy that they do share a paragraph, that they're introduced one right after the other, even though they seem completely unrelated. One thing that I noted is the fact that their ages are wrong. I actually, as I was going through this, I was like, oh, like, now that I'm actually really deeply reading, I can go edit things if I need to go edit. So I did edit that, but they're actually both supposed to be 16.
Oh.
And the thing about this is that one of my least favorite things on earth is time math,
Mm,
where if I have to figure out, like, they're supposed to be this old, but they were born at this time, and it's like, there, how many years, what time is it in the year? And it's like, that is like one of the things I am so bad at. My brain just, like, cannot do it.
mhm,
But I went and checked my work, because I was like, I don't think they're supposed to be 15, because of the fact that they're summer babies. They're born in the summer. So I went back. I was like, okay, Charlie in season 3, he's the earliest because he's May 29th is his birthday. And so he was going to turn at the end of season 3, because school at Adams ends like in the middle of May, late May. So he always turns the next year right at the end of the school year.
Mhm.
So he is about to turn, so we left off end of season 3, he was about to turn 19. So it's like,
Dang.
okay, if he's about to turn 19, then he was about to turn 18 at the end of season 2. And if he was about to turn 18 then, he was about to turn 17 at the end of season 1, which means he has to be 16 because he would have turned 16 at the end of freshman year. So I was
Dang.
like doing this math to myself. I was like, like anybody that has heard me talk about ambition for longer than like 2 minutes will know that at some point I have complained about this, about being like, I don't know how old they are. Like, god damn. So that should be 16, and I changed it, so now they are actually 16. Not to go on a huge tangent about that, but I read it and I was like, this isn't right. I just knew it didn't seem right. And then we see that, with everybody else too. I actually went and double checked all the other ages because I was like, was I wrong about anybody else? And I actually was wrong about someone else. The other character who has the wrong age in the version that I went and fixed is Farkle.
Oh.
It says in the new version that Farkle is 15. He's
Mm.
actually 14.
What?
He doesn't turn 15 until February because he is the baby of the A class. He's like 2 years behind.
Damn.
The ironic thing though is that in the OG, his year was right.
Oh.
So I'm like, why did I change that? Like,
What?
why did I make it 15 instead? But no, he's the baby, so he's 14. And then the other baby is Asher, because Asher is about 5 months older than him, but they're both the ones that are a little bit behind everybody else.
Right. Okay.
And I feel like Farkle gives baby energy. Like, you can
Oh,
tell he's the baby of this
yeah.
group.
14-year-olds are a lot more messy as well, and you can see that in him.
with his beautiful, amazing, iconic blazer, fashion icon,
Yes.
Farkle
A
Mankus.
blazer. I mean, I just thought that was quite funny because in my high school, we had to wear blazers as the uniform. So,
Right.
and we weren't like, that's
Yeah.
just kind of normal in New Zealand because public schools often have uniforms.
Right. You think about Charlie too in Haverford in season 3. They wear uniforms.
Yeah, but they're like a fancy school. My school was like just the public girl school.
You know what? It's equality. That's what it is when they put you in those uniforms. I took a couple notes here of some irony. Charlie's introduction being one of them, that he is holding court with a lot of the girls in the class, seemingly the preferred cute male of choice at AAA. Let's let that sink in. Let that hang out. I have another note about it later, but I want to save it for when the second note came up. But then the other one
Mhm.
was with Maya. Yep, where the most glamorous girl
Uh-huh.
Riley has ever seen, from the glossy blonde hair to the perfectly put together outfit that looks entirely made of designer items. As we know, it may look entirely made
I
of designer items, but is it?
That's a good question, and not one you will find the answer to from Maya. She would never tell.
I also wrote the note that I think this was something I think was added in the new version, but more following Jack through this, you get
Mm.
much more of a sense that kind of derision that the students have for him.
Mm.
I
Yeah,
wrote that
it's
he's a walking cock
ooh,
block, ace ally, because he makes the kids stop kissing just from showing up. So you gotta love that. And then the
beautiful.
fact that one thing I think is really interesting is when he tells the students that are dancing to stop dancing, which clearly that never works because they dance all the time in the hallways in this show. Um, but the fact that Zay like scowls at him, I think is interesting because
Mm.
we think of Zay as like the least diva-y, and like he is a very nice guy. He's a good kid, but even he is like, oh fuck this guy. So it's really interesting that everybody's like this guy over here.
Yeah, I mean, who really loves their principal?
Well, we know who loves their principal
But
now, but
yes.
back then, yeah, no.
And speaking of, I wrote this down getting to the next sort of little bit in the atrium. I said, if you've seen a more threatening introduction of a character, I would like to see it because Lucas and Isadora are terrifying in their
Yeah,
introduction.
yeah. One of the things I highlighted here, going to the techie moment, is I highlighted the line that they're all in dark clothes because that's how techies dress, but so do goths. And I highlighted that because of the fact that when I wrote that a million years ago, I made myself chuckle And even now, it makes me chuckle. And I think it's just like the way it's like a little bit. I think you see in the original that even the writing is a little more, I don't want to say unprofessional, but it's a little more just like casual.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the examples of that, but I keep it because I think it's fun. So it's like there's
It
certain
is
things
fun.
that I think we develop the kind of conversational tone that the narrator has over time, but I just love the way it's like goths? Question mark, question mark, question mark? Especially because we know these characters now and they're not goths. Maybe
No.
maybe Issa, maybe Lucas. Lucas is more like an emo.
Yeah.
But all of them, no.
No,
Dylan
no.
Orlando, a goth.
No.
You had to laugh. But I highlighted as well, kind of on that same thread, the introduction of Nate and Jeff, where they're arguing and it's hard to tell if they are really upset.
Mm.
I think that's an interesting thing because, like, just like we said, coming to know these characters, I think if we saw them arguing now in season 3, we've seen them argue on the show, and we know it's just how that's their friendship. It's just how they talk to each other.
Yeah.
But that first impression that Riley's getting is like, oh my gosh, like they're
Yelling.
fighting with each other. Oh my goodness, do they hate each other?
The school is so tense.
But yes, there's one line that I like that I added. This was not in the original, but I think
Mm.
it's very important that I added it, so I'm glad I did. When they introduce Lucas and Issa,
Mm-hmm.
it says they're deep in conversation. Well, conversation meaning Isadora is ranting and Lucas isn't saying much of anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important. I'm glad that I added that because of the fact that Lucas and his kind of muteness a lot of the time is such a huge part of his character. The fact that he is the quiet, there's a brooding element to it, but he really just is not very talkative. He's
Mm.
kind of shy and he feels like he never knows what to say. We can unpack that even as we go because there's ways that it really feeds into different things, but I'm glad that I added that here because I want it to be clear from the get-go that like he is not really a talker. He's not the conversationalist.
I was just kind of skipping back a little bit because we kind of
Mm-hmm.
bypassed this, but I made sure to put it in my notes. The fact that Charlie and Zay are first mentioned being next to each other, like basically in the same sentence,
Yes.
same
Mm-hmm.
paragraph. And um I just thought that was intriguing and interesting.
Right. Even though they seemingly have nothing to do with each other.
Yeah.
Like they're not, their sentences are together, but they're not related.
Yeah, they just happen to be
Hmm.
standing near each other. And as we know, this isn't actually for really any reason, or is it? Like,
I don't, yeah, I don't know. Maybe. No. I
maybe,
don't know.
no.
They're just two guys standing there. But yes,
I
I did with their
yeah,
scariness, with the scariness of Issa and Lucas, I did
yes.
highlight the fact that I think that we very much jokingly picked on and got a lot of not real flack, but just this introduction of the switchblade, right? Like seems so dramatic and like so
Mm,
silly. But it is important that it's there because as we
yeah,
know, we come to learn why he has a switchblade.
yes. And also the Switchblade has important things to do later on, many seasons ahead from now.
Yes, yes, it does have a continued relevance, but I think it's just kind of this fun thing that again, not to sound pretentious, but what S and I really try to if we're including something, it's usually for a reason. It's not if it's something that seems as like what the hell is
Oh, yeah.
this? It's for a reason.
Yeah,
We're not just with the exception of like Dave and his bagpipes. Like that's just cuz it's
yeah.
fun. But if it's not fun,
It's like the rule of Chekhov's gun, right?
yes, yes, that is the right term. That if there's a gun on the wall, it will be used in some way by the end of the performance. Yes.
Exactly.
Exactly. I also highlighted she yeets out of there, which is another
Yes.
kind of example of so do gods. It's just that kind of very casual that I kept because of the fact that I was like, it's so classic original Ambition that I'm not going to
Yeah,
delete it.
it's
So,
hilarious.
and
It was so much more like commentary almost.
then we got that first Ambition Q title sequence, which we
I
did not have in the original.
Yeah, I noticed that because that was something I think I talked about with you because I love title sequences. So I did write in my notes here, tell tell the listeners, what are you imagining for the title sequence?
The title sequence. So this is something that we have gone back and forth on a lot, S and I, for the most part, especially in the first season, I think, and this can kind of be an interesting conversation point, but in the first season, I very much imagine it like very brief. Like there's some title sequences that are just like a couple seconds.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Glee was like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, for me, I kind of imagined it, especially because we had this motif of promo in a yearbook style in the first season. I imagine it kind
Mm.
of like the flipping pages of a yearbook, and
Mm-hmm.
it would close and there would be ambition. We have discussed, because you've talked about, would there be a theme song? And I've always been like,
Mm.
I have no idea. But we've discussed in the past that we have landed on this kind of suggestion of yours, Maddie, that
Mm-hmm.
there's a song by AJR, the artist AJR, which is I'm Not Famous, off their album The Click. And I think that that fits pretty well to the theme and the vibe. The
Mm-hmm.
thing is that, thinking about season 1, season 2, season 3, season 2 is a season where I'm like, I can't imagine a theme, because season 2 is so heavy
Mm.
and has such a kind of, even the promo for it was very dark. It was black and white. It was, everybody looked sad. And this idea of like, let's go AJR, like during season 2 is a little like, I don't know if that fits. But season 3, what I think I've kind of settled on in my head is that the theme would be a little bit kind of like, the promo in season 3 was about like kind of Riley's journal, like the things she's writing to herself, her agenda. And so you have
Mm.
like the handwriting style and doodles and stuff like that. And so I've kind of
Mm-hmm.
imagined this thing that maybe I can share the version mock up that I did one time of, it would be kind of like you've mentioned, like the Legend of Tomorrow opening, if anybody has seen
Mm.
that, where it's kind of like comic booky, collagey, like
Mm.
things kind of pulled together. And that's kind of how I imagine season three's, with I'm Not Famous as that song. That's the issue, is that I feel like every season feels so different to a degree that it's like there is no like perfect universal, this is exactly how I imagine it. But that being said, I do have a very specific song for credits. I think that the one thing that was very specific about Glee was every time an episode ended, no matter how it ended, you'd come to
Mm.
that acapella like
Da-da-da-da-da-da.
right, exactly. And that, I have a song like that that I think of for Ambition. It is, for those who want to go investigate and listen, it is on our every Ambition song ever thing. Actually, I've included it at the very end of that. But it is from the Supergirl season 1 soundtrack, and it is called, I believe, Inspirational Boss. That's what it
Yeah.
is. But it has this very kind of similar thing with that Glee, where it's like very like dun 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 dun, and it's like very like upbeat and fun, which I think again is that's what Ambition feels like at the core, is like we're at an art school and it's so fun. But what I love about that is the fact that like this is how the show feels. But to imagine, like, you're watching, spoiler alert, you're watching 207, right? The end of that
Mm.
episode is that Farkle has tried to kill himself, and you hear Stewart being like, call an ambulance, and to just imagine that, and it goes to black, and then it's like dun 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 dun. Like basically, I love this kind of dissonance of like no matter what happens at the end, you always come back to this upbeat thing,
Mm.
and I
Yeah.
just love that. I think it's fun.
That is fun. I think it's a choice because I know in some, like The West Wing, there's a couple of episodes where I think it's The West Wing, they don't have the end music, or am I thinking of another show? But there's like where if it's like a really dark ending, they didn't have the ending music,
hmm
and you kind of just sit there being like sad.
I like being even worse about it and being like, here's a really happy song that you're so familiar
Yeah,
with
yeah.
right after you've just had this horrible experience. So it's a creator
Yeah,
preference for sure, but I think it's very
definitely.
fun. So yes, then we come back in here. We've got, this is where I was like, Jack and Eric are being really yikes to each other.
Mhm.
When we first get our Eric introduction, and we learn, oh, he's related to Riley, and he says some shit. Jack says some shit about the fact that there's so many Matthews in this school. It's like, damn, Jack. Like, Riley's right there. Like, why would you
Yeah.
do that to her?
Like, she's new, and you're going, "There's too many Matthews in this school." Like, way to welcome your new student.
I love the fact that they're like, it's so like shady gay though, where it's like not like Jack's very professional, so he's not going to be like, fuck you, Eric, but he's like saying these very backhanded things. But
Yeah.
Eric is also good at that because he was a catty theater gay. So
Yeah.
his line, I suppose AAA has always been about family. That's why you hired Sean, right? Top of the line, highly skilled educators. He's mocking that video. It's just like, wow.
It's so
Whew.
sassy. It's amazing.
And I love that Riley just is like, I really don't know how to respond to this. I'm gonna like look away. What am
I was like, okay, cool. Zoning out. Good stuff.
Right. And then Jack also says to Eric, like, after all, Eric does just love to meander time away. Like, you can see exactly what their issues are with each other. But I do like the fact that, yes, Eric's line is bitchy, but the fact that he says, I suppose AAA's always been about family. Wink, wink. Yeah, it has.
Mm.
Then I also highlighted that Jack assures Riley that he's certain she'll find what she's looking for at Adams.
Ooh, and she will.
So then we go into the auditorium. It's our first time in this beautiful auditorium that we will spend so much time in. One thing that I particularly wanted to point out is that when Riley is looking for her place to sit, one of the worst feelings of a young person,
Mm-hmm.
she plops herself right in the middle of the performers and the techies.
Mm.
And I think that that is very interesting narratively that she does that.
Yeah, I mean, it's symbolic, one might say.
One could say that, yes. What I think is very interesting is the fact that Riley's our everyman, and she's the one that we're coming into this with. She's our eyes. But the thing is, Riley, if she, in a way, is the camera, and she's kind of angling how we're viewing these people for the first time, she's in some ways an unreliable narrator because we don't know, she doesn't know anything about them. And that's one thing, like, here we have this moment where she sits down and it's awkward, and Dave turns around to whisper to Dylan and Asher. And I think the way that if you're a nervous student like Riley, that can come off like, oh my God, they're talking about me. And we don't know who the techies are. We don't know what they're like. So it could be that they're, much like we just saw Jack and Eric being bitchy to each other, what kind of shitty things are they saying about her? But as we know, knowing who Dave and Dylan and Asher are, it's really much more likely that Dave turned around and was like, it's so sad that she's like that. Should we invite her to sit with us? Or something like
Yeah,
that. But
exactly.
but without that context, it comes off like dangerous. And I think that it's so interesting that we're seeing all of this through Riley's perspective. It's not necessarily reality.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a good way to look at things is that you, in your anxious newbie mind, wherever you are, might think, oh, they're looking at me because of this, but that could just be Dave being like, oh my gosh, I love the like flower in her hair. She should come sit with us.
Right.
She's pretty.
Actually, you know what it really is? It's really probably Dave turning around and being like, who is that?
Yeah. Did I forget someone who was
Right.
in our class? I do not remember
Exactly.
her. Wait,
That's
is it
probably
just
exactly what he
me?
was saying, actually.
Yeah,
It's like, does
exactly.
anybody else see that girl?
Yeah. Like, guys, this is not like that thing where someone just like is haunting us, right? Like they probably
I
have some
mean,
joke about.
right, and that's true because in the next episode too, they talk about the ghost. They make up a
Yeah.
ghost. So maybe he's like, "Oh my god, I'm seeing the phantom. You guys, hold on, hold on." Funny. And then you have Lucas, of course, just sitting there and watching her, not helping, not making things worse, just sitting there.
So threatening. So ominous.
Gotta love a brooding little bitch boy. So then we meet Angela. We kind of get a sense of what is her teaching style like. She's making some beautiful dramatic speeches. Issa
Mhm.
rolls her eyes at Angela's beautiful dramatic speeches. And then we meet the one, the only Sean Hunter.
Yeah, it's very interesting knowing what happens in the future, seeing this and other interactions between these two. It just really is like almost whiplash if you go from reading like a later episode to this.
Yeah. Kind of that same thing as Jack and Eric. Like,
Definitely.
that's like one reason that it's really exciting that we're doing this, and one reason I always tell people, like, if you have the time, if you have the interest, go back and reread the series, because
Mm.
the further you get in, it's like when you go back, there's just such a thing of like, whoa, wow, like look at how these things change, changes, you know.
Yes.
So yes, we meet Sean, and he's unshaven and a mess and slovenly. He's Sean, to put it
Yep.
simply. And then one thing that I highlighted is something that one of my favorite things, which I believe was in the original but was kind of buried in. I used to do this thing that I've really stopped doing for the most part, but where I used to
Mhm.
bury action lines in dialogue.
Yeah.
And it was
Yeah.
confusing, and I'm glad I stopped doing that. But this moment that I think is actually very telling of the techies and their personalities when Angela says, "Do you have anything you care to share?" And Sean says, "Sing some stuff." And then the techies erupt into cheers and give him a standing ovation. And it's just that kind of, you see there's such a cheeky, like, I just love it. I think it's very telling of their group and
It
their kind of
is.
humor and their existence in the school. Like, they won't give a standing ovation to Maya's performance, but they will give a standing ovation to Sean Hunter saying, "Sing some stuff."
Yeah, and it's good because the techies do continue to be a bit more of an important group than, like, the performers as a group, say, like,
Yes, yes.
and so it's nice that you kind of get to know the techies as, like, a character in the first episode a bit.
Yeah. That's one thing that is different from the original to now, is that I think looking
Mm,
back on it, I noted that
mhm,
I added a lot more just small moments of the techies, a little more
exactly.
detail. They have more dialogue, and I think that is intentional of, like, they are such an important group that you
Yeah.
wanted to get a little bit more of a sense of them, even if it's just these small glimpses that Riley is picking up. So then we have our first performance of the school year, and it becomes a scrap between Zay and Maya and Farkle about who's going to perform first. I I literally wrote in my notes, I think it's hilarious that Farkle literally like pushes Zay away and like knocks him down to get to the stage. You can see there's Farkle, the little crazy diva. And I think too it's a fun detail that I know Emma and Hanny have pointed out on their podcast, but that they don't take the stairs, that they like leap over the front of the stage.
Yeah, which do they not have an orchestra pit?
So the way that I imagine the stage in Ambition is very similar to the stage that I had in high school, which we had an orchestra pit, but it was one that was movable. So it could
Mm,
be risen up normally and you'd have the full stage, but then if you needed an orchestra, you could lower the orchestra pit. And so
damn,
the stage could
fancy.
be different sizes based on what you needed. So that's how I've always imagined theirs, especially because they do in the show they do not use the orchestra pit that much. I'm sure they
Yeah,
use it during musicals,
yeah.
but for classes, like they don't need it. So that they in that moment
Mm.
they are just climbing right up on the normal front lip of the stage that has not been lowered to have the pit. But then also, for example, like in 310, when Maya and Asher are partnered and Maya shoves him into the orchestra pit, that's when it's down. So it's just, I think, depending on what the narrative need is, sometimes there's a pit and sometimes there isn't. But that can be done by having one that rises and falls.
I'm sure you have some thoughts about this.
About Man About Town.
Yes, very iconic performance.
Yes, it's one of my favorites. And it got an updated description in the revamp. In the original, it didn't really get much of a description at all. It was just like he sings, and Riley is like, "Whoa," to put it
Yeah,
simply. But I wanted to get a little more into what does his delivery like, and what does that convey about him. And what you get here is Farkle was a power tenor without a doubt, able to reach pretty high in his register and even higher in energetic delivery. The electricity in his performance is less intrinsic and more frantic, though, indicative of a craving for the spotlight and a scrappy, determined nature to maintain it at whatever cost. And it also talks about how he has the capacity to be obnoxious, which is true. I just, first of all, like this song. I enjoy it. I think it's nice and pleasant. I like the fact that it comes back, as we'll see later, because I think it really is a core song for Farkle. And I think part of that is it's indicative of his high ambitions with some of the lyrics in the song, like, "You're gonna be the man about town," In the show, it's Victor Frankenstein singing to the monster he's just created, being like, "You're gonna be you're gonna fit in, you're gonna be the talk of the town, everyone's gonna love you, you're gonna be this great thing." But for Farkle, I think it's more about him singing that to himself of, "This is my destiny. I'm going to be great. I'm going to be the man about town." But he has lines, like in the show, he's singing to the monsters. So it's like, though you feel like a beast in the cage, stick with me and you'll be on the stage. I think it's kind of him, talking to himself. Obviously, his fellow students would not get that. But I think that that's what a lot of it is building for, is he's singing about high ambitions, but it's covering for his low self-esteem and that internal monster that we know comes back. What I like about the music in this episode is that it is everybody's kind of first. What is their first performance? Like, what does it say about them? What does it reflect? And I think that this is a very good fitting first performance for Farkle. So then we move into the girls' dressing room after that, when Riley has now been like, oh shit, people are good here. No kidding. So then in the girls' dressing room, we have an interesting little scene with Maya and her little clones, Darby and Sarah. And this dialogue was much shorter in the original. It was more condensed. Their scene got elaborated. But my favorite line in this scene, that is one of my favorite lines in the show, just because I think it's hilarious, is when Sarah says, he looks like Mike TV in Willy Wonka after he got put through the taffy puller. I'm like, that is like the meanest way to describe someone,
So mean.
but it's also so funny. Like, it's such a hyper specific, it's almost like a Cheryl Blossom Riverdale insult, but not as annoying, even though Sarah is annoying. But she says to Darby, God, you fall for anything with testosterone and half a working vocal cord. And I think that's ironic because I don't know if people get this vibe. Here's a little creator tidbit. So Darby is sapphic. She's a lesbian. I think at this point in her youth, being 15, 16, I don't think she knows that for sure for herself yet. I think that they're sort of her thing of having a crush on everybody, it seems, is much more compulsory heterosexuality, and so she's feeling like she has to vocalize that to be like, yeah, that's what I feel. It's fine. So it's interesting that like Sarah picks up on that disdainfully, but the kind of ironic thing about it is like, well, actually, no, she doesn't. I think it's a very interesting there's your little fun fact about Darby, is that she is not straight. And then it's also interesting, that they're talking about boys, and Maya has no interest in that and finds it very boring. So I think that that's telling about her as well. And we get that first initial thing of their rivalry between Farkle and Maya.
In the next scene, Riley goes and gets this is a really interesting scene to me because we've been kind of getting a feel for a few of the characters at this point. We just had that chat with the clones.
Yeah.
We've had a bit of the techies. We've seen a bit of the diva antics. But this is when we actually finally get, like, someone telling us
Yes.
the things, which are also from Eric's point of view. So then maybe
Exactly.
not quite
Yeah,
right.
that's what I was going to say, is that we're getting someone to spell it out for us, but again, it's someone else's impression. It is not necessarily who they are. Yeah, so that takes us right into the third song of the episode, which is High School Never Ends by Bowling for Soup, a classic of the early 2000s. I think that this song is one of the classic Ambition concepts, I think, where you kind of get that first initial sense of like, sometimes on the show, songs will be used in very interesting ways visually. Like, it won't necessarily just be characters are performing a song. Especially with this one, it's an instrumental, so it's not nobody's performing it, but just this idea that maybe things are not going to be as straightforward as Farkle gets on the stage and he sings,
Yeah. When you say instrumental, does that mean that there's no words in it?
That's a good
Or just
question.
no one from the show is singing the words?
When we use it, it means that no one is singing it on the show. It's this. We will specify. Usually, we'll pick a version if it's just an instrumental, like no lyrics. We'll pick a version of that for the playlist so that it's very clear that that's what it is. But instrumental for us just means like it's playing in the scene, but it's not being performed in the scene.
Yeah. I do feel like in the early episodes, you do have a few more instrumental tracks than later on, I guess because you got very experienced at writing more ways of people singing them.
Yeah.
But it definitely works well in the introductory episodes because you do need to get a more general feel of things rather than being like deep into someone's feelings.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too because I think one thing that changes as well later in the series is that a lot in season 1, if we have an instrumental, it literally is just an instrumental. It's just the song being used. Whereas in season 3, it becomes a little more like we have the A class still singing it. It's still our cast singing it, but it's not actively being performed. Like an example of that is in the Disney themed episode in 302, they sing, it's their vocals doing Second Star to the Right at the very beginning. But it's not, that's not like a performance, you know, it is still used like an instrumental, but it says performed by the A class because their voices are who we imagine singing it. Whereas for like High School Never Ends with the Louvre in the finale of season one, like those are just like not at all connected to the characters. So I think that is something we do later is we try to do more of like, well, the A class could still be singing this. We want to use their voices as much as we can. So High School Never Ends.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot going on. It's definitely a good way to introduce a lot of people in a short amount of time.
To me, it's interesting. I think of it kind of like there's three like kind of moments in this triad of like us
Mhm.
meeting these characters. The first one is in Changes, which we just talked about, where
Yeah.
we see them all through Riley's perspective and a little bit through Jack's. Then we have
Mhm.
this one, which is kind of like it seems like it's the official way to look at it, but it's also still
Right.
Eric's perspective. And then at the end, we have the little thing during one where we see all
Mhm.
of a glimpse of them in their houses or lack
Yes.
thereof, and that's kind of like the third, like, oh, but maybe there's something like this is a little bit more closer to what's actually going on. So it's kind of like this progression of different viewpoints
Mm.
of them,
Yeah, I love that.
and each one kind of has a little bit of truth, you know what I mean?
Yeah, each one is true in a different way.
Right.
One is still a first impression that they give off, and one is another impression that they've given off, and another is something that they're hiding from everyone.
Or just is like the thing that's behind the door that if you don't know
Yeah.
them you wouldn't know these things about them. So we start here with Zay, and I highlighted a little line within Eric's explanation of him. He was voted most popular in the yearbook last year, but the only thing he cares about more than his public approval rating is dance. I mean, the kid is religious about it.
Ooh. Ooh, a motif.
Yes, it's kind of interesting that he chose that word. I wonder
Yeah.
why. And then there's this whole thing he says where he talks about divas because Riley asked about diva status, like what's that mean? That was
Yes.
not in the original. That is something that got added.
Because you felt like you needed to explain it?
Just because I think Riley would be like, what is diva status? Who's a diva? Like, what does that mean?
Why are you guys so extra?
Right. And I think to just have it be sort of acknowledged that, like, it's something that is known in the class, that they know
Mhm.
certain kids are divas and they call each other that. And that kind of
Mm.
comes back up later as well. So then we pan once again, we pan from
Ooh.
Zay to Charlie. One thing that I think is funny about his introduction is that he says he's doing choreography with this gaggle of female classmates, including Haley,
Mm.
and that they're all like enamored with him. But to me, I'm a little bit like, who are all these girls who want to date
Yeah,
Charlie?
exactly, I wrote that down in my notes. I was like,
Where are
how like,
they?
'cause especially what Eric says about him is, like, a reputation with the ladies, and I wrote, "How does Charlie have a reputation with the ladies? How?
Yeah,
Just
it's
how?
fun.
Like,
It's just
what?"
I'm
We're
like, just
ladies.
there must be like a harem in the B class that's like, oh, we love Charlie because we know those
Yes.
A class girls are like, who gives a crap about him?
Yeah, true. I mean, when you're, like, 15, it really can be, like, everyone is just insane. Like, I remember, like, watching from afar and being like, "I don't get it. Like, why is everyone dating each other?"
Yeah. Yeah, I just thought it was so funny as I was just like, I don't who is in love with him except for Haley, like in our cuz in our group, we know them so well now and it's like none of them were like crushing on Charlie.
Yeah,
And it's funny, it's like those
yeah.
gaggle of girls are like gone. Like they just go away after this. Okay.
And never to be seen again.
That's what they're B class. They have to be B class if they're just gone
Yeah.
immediately.
That is the pilot symptom right there. The
That
the B-class
that
girls,
disappeared.
just never seen again.
So good. Yeah, that's I highlighted as well in terms of irony. A lot of what Eric says about Charlie, that I'm sure your dad would want me to warn you that he has a reputation with the ladies. Like, okay. Um,
Alright.
and then that Eric immediately then goes, I don't think I've seen him date anyone. Like, what do you mean?
And he's
Okay
like, "Wait a
then.
second. Wait." And then he's like, I'm connecting the dots. Interesting. I'm gonna
So
ponder that
funny.
later." Yeah.
So then at the end of that, as he's transitioning into talking about the next person, he says, I thought this was interesting in terms of foreshadowing, but if you're looking for what to avoid, and then it goes to Issa. And I think that it's
Mm.
very interesting that Eric phrased it that way, even though he's not meaning it in a mean way, but knowing how close Issa and Eric are going to become and the relationship that they're going to develop,
Mm.
it's very
Oh,
interesting
yeah.
to see it start that way, you know? That it's like this kind of removed feeling.
That is very interesting. Yeah, he's really not made sort of the breakthrough with Issa that he later makes. And yeah, once he knows more about her, he would never say that.
Yeah, or put it like that. I think it's
Yeah.
he with Issa, and as we know, and we'll talk about later in that scene, Jack with Lucas. It's like no breakthroughs have been made. Breakthroughs don't exist at this point. There's nothing to break through. Everything
It is a
is
far off dream.
yes, exactly. A big piece of this as well is that we talked a little bit about this already, but the techies are more present in this version than they were in the original.
Mm.
Like Nate
Mhm.
gets mentioned in the original, but Dylan is now here. Dave gets a mention. Jade and Asher, I think, are mentioned when they weren't mentioned in the original. So their presence is just more
Yes,
noticeable.
it is. Yeah, because I remember originally reading it and then learning about the techies as we went. Like you taught me about
Mm-hmm.
them. And
Yeah.
in this, it's almost like anyone who read it now would know so much more about that dynamic than someone reading the original.
There's a line Eric says as he's so we transition from Issa to Maya, and Eric refers to her. Maya is probably the most talented triple threat we have in the sophomore class. It's interesting to me, I think in season 1, because we see this as
Mhm.
well when he like fights for her with her scholarship issues. I feel like Eric was much more invested in Maya and like
Mm.
her potential and her talent, and this interesting thing of, oh, she's the most talented triple threat, but it's like we
Mm.
know Zay is like actively competing.
Mm.
And I think it kind of just goes to show like that feeling that Zay has, especially in season 1, of like I'm overlooked, no one pays attention to me, I am kind of lost. This is kind
Mhm.
of proof of that. Like even Eric is not putting him on the same level.
Wow, tragic, but true.
It's rough.
Mm. It's interesting that he says that because then you immediately go into the next rest of the episode and series, I suppose, thinking that Maya is probably the most talented triple threat, and then you immediately, not immediately, but eventually you kind of have that disproved to you, or like,
Mm-hmm. Right. Like we're definitely setting her up as the golden girl.
mm,
And I think you then have Farkle who wants to be the golden girl, but is
yeah.
constantly undercutting himself in a lot of ways. I highlighted this moment when the 2x4 almost hits Lucas in the head and we freeze frame on him rolling his eyes. I highlighted that because there's two moments in this montage that are so clear visual to me that I love, and
Mhm,
that's one of them. Is just that the mid eye roll, like I'm gonna kill everybody here. I
mhm.
think it's so like quintessential to that early perception of his character, and I also just think it's funny.
Yeah, I love that visual. This whole bit is one of my favorites, like, I love the song, and I love imagining a little montage where they're sort of posing in funny
Right, you gotta
posing,
love
but,
like
like
a freeze frame
yeah,
moment.
who doesn't love a freeze frame moment? Record scratch, like, Lucas is like, "That's me. I bet you're wondering, how did I get here?"
How did I get to this moment? Yeah, literally, we could go on a totally different track with this show.
Yeah.
That would be really funny. It's kind of
It
like the Twilight Stephanie Meyer, where she writes Twilight from like 7 different perspectives. This is like the
yeah,
Lucas's version of Ambition, which would be, I think, very grim to be
it
reading.
would, it would.
It'd be
Oof.
funny, but it'd also be grim.
Yeah, it would be, like, tragic. Tragic comedy.
We transition here. We're talking about Lucas now. And I love that Eric says, do not mess with Lucas James Fryer. If my dad were here, he'd tell you not to speak to him. Don't even look at him unless absolutely necessary. And I love how Riley heard that advice and she said,
And
got it,
no,
bet, not gonna take that advice.
I hear you, but I am choosing not to listen.
I am respectfully declining not to look at him.
She loves to look at him.
And he likes to look at her, as we will come to find. But there is a little added bit here that originally it jumped Eric jumped from talking about him being like not liking the school and then jumping even more into notes about that. But there's a little added beat here in this new version of Riley asking outright, why is he here if he doesn't like to
Mm.
be here? And Eric's answer kind of takes in, I think, another theme that I highlighted. He says, I think you'll come to find everyone came here for different reasons.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a big point of the school part of ambition, but also like there's a grander theme. Everyone's here for a different reason. And then the other image that I have highlighted that I think is so funny and is like probably the most vivid is when Lucas has to duck out of the way to avoid Farkle swinging his arms out wide and doing his dramatic belt. I'm like, what is he singing? What? In the middle of all this chaos, but it's like the freeze on him there, I can just see so perfectly.
Iconic moment.
And I think it's hilarious that Eric makes a Glee reference, like a literal Glee reference, Rachel Berry.
He's like, once I start working at an art school, I should probably watch Glee, right? Is that good
It's like how
research?
old? Because Glee was now like what, 10 years ago? So it's like
Yeah.
how old was he? He was in his 20s, late 20s. So he was
Probably
probably
he would
watching
have watched
Glee.
it. Yeah, true.
Yeah. So then we go back to class. Riley avoids answering the question about what she's going to perform, which is pretty classic Riley, I think.
Yeah.
And as she's settling back in, there's a new scene that was added. This was not in the original, and it's more of the techies. It's more of getting into
Yeah.
their dynamics. We have Dylan kind of joking about this idea of what if he usurps Maya and goes on stage and does a performance instead. And Nate has this moment of going, as if you can even sing. And Dylan responds, you don't know. You don't know. I could be great. You don't know. And to me, I think in adding that retroactively in the rewrite, it was very intentional, not just to get a little more of a taste of what their characters are like as all the techies,
Mm-hmm.
but just this thing too of we kind of went through that as an audience and as writers of like, oh, the techies won't
Mm.
perform. And then as we know, Dylan and Asher perform all the time now. Like they're very
Mm-hmm.
much performing characters, even if they're not performers. So that's kind of a little wink to that is like, we don't know. We don't know. They could be performers. We just don't know. There's a piece of lore that I don't know if I've ever shared publicly, but Dylan was actually in his backstory, he was supposed to be at the school as a performer. He applied as a performer. And the thing about it though is that he was going to go in for like guitar performance, right? Because he's really good at playing the guitar. But he, in classic Dylan fashion, made a mistake on his form and he didn't check that he wanted to be a performer. He left that blank. And so when he went in for his audition, they asked him like, "Did you are you are you going to be a performer? Did you want to be a technical student? Like what are you going for?" And Dylan, in Dylan fashion, was like, "Whatever, I'll do anything." And then that's part of the reason that he got in was because he was able to balance because they like to have,
Mm.
not a million performers and like two technicians. So I think that if he had initially been like, "Oh, I definitely just want to be a performer," there's a chance that the A class would look different, either because he was put there and someone else didn't make it, or he wouldn't get in because he was not quote unquote good enough. So it's this kind of like great little Dylan twist of fate that like
Wow.
just from being very go with the flow and like, yeah, whatever, it's cool, he was able to make that work. And I think it's so telling that his personality is so extroverted and so friendly. And I think that without him there, the techies would not have become the techies in the same way that they
Ooh.
are now because he was this very central focal point to like bringing
Yeah.
everybody together because he is like that one who would in their group chat go in their group chat and be like, let's hang out, guys, let's do stuff together. And I think if he had not been a technician and had not been in their group and was not doing all of that, I think that they would all get along and they'd have their own dynamics, but they wouldn't be like a cohort group the way that they are.
And that's his power.
Yes, that's his purpose, is to be the person that brings it all together. So then we go into the fourth performance of the episode. This is Maya's solo. She's really sassy about it and to piss off Farkle. And before we get into the actual performance, Dave has a line here that's one of my favorites, which Farkle goes, "This bitch knows I claimed all numbers in the alphabet song canon. Unbelievable." And Dave says to Yogi, "Okay, what is a song canon and how do I get one?" I I just love
So
Dave.
good.
He has the best lines, truly. So Wizard and I, the thing is that to me this, Farkle being like, oh, she's doing this to spite me. On the
Mm.
one hand, it's like he's being dramatic, but on the other hand, it is really a spiteful choice because not only do I think in our motif of things that in the Wicked motif, it's definitely connected to Maya and Farkle, and Maya is the Glinda and he's the Elphaba,
Mm-hmm.
but I think the song itself is very much a Farkle song if you listen to the words, because it's very much about being so desperate to be accepted and to be seen for like everything that you are and not what you're not.
Ooh.
And I think that that's so true to him. Like, I think he probably is genuinely a little bit offended in the sense that, like, this is the song that's very special to him. There's a lyric, especially in the middle, that I think is very pointed to that. Elphaba's like, when I'm with the wizard, my whole life's gonna change, everyone's gonna accept me. And there's the lines, when you're with the wizard, no one thinks you're strange. No father is not proud of you. No sister acts ashamed. And
Hmm.
all of Oz has to love you when by the wizard you're acclaimed.
Wow.
And like the thing about your father
Mm-hmm.
being proud of you
Mm-hmm.
for what you can do and your siblings not disdaining you
Yeah,
and being just adored. It's like all right there. Like it's all on the paper as like this is so Farkle.
it is. I don't think I've ever really noticed because, yeah, again, you have to listen to the music for these things.
Yes, I was going to say I would recommend if people I'm sure some people listening already know the song, but if you have not listened to it, listen to it. And then if you do listen to it or want to listen to it again, listen to it with Farkle in mind as you're listening to the lyrics. And I think you'll see that while Maya is the one like powerhousing it, it really speaks much more to Farkle.
That is the circular economy of Maya and Farkle.
It's funny too, I this number in the original, I literally wrote nothing. I wrote nothing about this performance.
And it's still
It
quite
was like
short.
I know, I was like, Maya's so good and Riley's terrified. And that was like it, basically. But clear in the new version I went into it just a little bit more to give more of a sense of this is our introduction to Maya as a performer. Like she's glamorous, she has a really strong voice, she's got talent. She has this line, it says, if anyone defines what it means to have ambition, it would be Maya. And I think that also plays a little bit on what we talked about in the last episode of the podcast of Maya kind of representing ambition as a show,
Mm.
about being the person who has those two sides of like there's emotion but there's also insanity.
Mm.
I think that line also kind of speaks to that. Is what does it mean? What does ambition mean? Look at Maya.
Wow, that's a tagline. Look at Maya. She would like that.
She's like, yep, let's keep it that way.
I mean, she genuinely sings Looking at Me, doesn't she? Later on.
Yes, she does in season 2. So then Riley has a little panic attack about how talented everybody is, and we get a little more detail. In the original, it was just like she had her freak out, and then she's like, "Okay, I'm gonna go make friends," which is still true. But I added a line here about she's not gonna let this year be like the others. She's not repeating her freshman year. So then there's that question of like,
Ooh,
oh, what does that mean?
yeah.
What is she repeating? What? So it's a little less just like generic
Yeah.
I'm gonna fit in, and there's clearly like something going on that's motivating this very needed change.
Yeah. And I know that that kind of thing has made some readers like very, very, you know who I'm talking about, very, very curious about what happened. Um,
Yeah.
and it's not like this whole like conspiracy level like thing that happened. It's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
very like freshman year, people suck, kind of.
Yeah. No, you're right. We have gotten a lot of questions in different forms of like what happened to Riley? What was the details? Like, are we ever gonna learn that? And the thing is, like, no. Because Esther and I we're both like, it's really just kind of generic. It almost doesn't matter the
Mm,
specifics of what happened to Riley because the point is she was ostracized, she was bullied, and it was not a great situation, and it pushed her to a place where she needed to get out. And I think that we don't really need the details of that. It would be, I think if we did try to go into detail, it would
mm.
just feel very generic
Yeah, it
and
would
not specific because,
everyone would
yeah,
probably be
go ahead.
like, "Oh, that's it?" Like, obviously, it wasn't good, but I think, um, everyone's independent experience being bullied is never, like, it never can come across exactly the same to everyone, so I think
Mm-hmm.
to some people it would come across as just very, like, I mean, okay,
And I also just think too, it's like there's almost this point to it that we try to get across with the anonymity, yeah, anonymity of it, of like you're probably wondering to yourself like, why would anybody bully Riley?
mm,
She's a nice girl, she's not causing any trouble, but that's like kind of the point.
mm,
Is like, yeah, why would anybody bully her? But people do because people are shitty. And I think it just plays also into this thing of this theme of belonging and ambition. Sometimes it's just you stand out
mm,
even if you don't mean to for whatever reason. And so that's like Riley's looking for that place where she won't feel like that and she won't be in that situation that is
yeah.
vague but kind of purposefully vague.
Yeah, I agree that it's beside the point to include it. The focus is on how she goes forward now
Right. Yep.
and how she changes.
Finds her confidence again. We have this new scene, then this is a completely new scene from the original versus the new version, which is between Angela and Jack.
Mm,
She kind of comes in to complain about Sean being a terrible teacher. And Jack insinuates during this scene that the reason Angela is so mad about it is not so much because of the teaching, but because of the personal relationship she has had with Sean in the
mm.
past.
Basically, like, stop being emotional and immature. Hmm?
To talk a little bit what you talked about earlier about we're seeing all these things that Jack is dealing with. It's not just troublesome students. It's my faculty is at each other's throats
Mm,
and my faculty doesn't like me and like all of these different things that he has to do but then act like he's not dealing with or that
yeah.
he's got under control
Yeah, he's like, if only people would stop dancing in the hallways at my art school, then maybe the teachers would stop fighting and yelling at me.
and talking shit in the teacher's lounge when I'm not there. Yeah. I highlighted a line here that he has though when they're talking about Jack initially tries to talk about Riley, to be like, let's not talk about my brother and let's just talk about the new kid. And he says, she seems nice, doesn't she? Good kid, should be a good influence, hopefully. And I highlighted that last part because as we know, that is very true.
He is. Jack knew it. Jack was right.
Jack was like, for the love of God, please.
I'm
I
manifesting.
can't handle another one.
And like the unspoken part is, if not, then that's the end for all of us.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that because I do think that is a little bit true actually.
Mm,
I think to get in a little bit of lore as well, I think Jack and Lucas, we see them in this episode and we will talk about it when we get there, but we see them at kind of a stalemate
mm,
in a way, like they've been through this so many times and I think if Riley had not come in and shook things up
mm,
and completely turned things upside down, I really think there's a chance that Jack would have given up and been like, no, I get him out of here. Like, I can't,
mm.
I'm done with him. Not on a personal sense, but on a like, I'm so sick of this kid.
Like that
And I think
that
he
one
was,
meme where they're like in It's Always Sunny and they're like looking at that photo and they're like, I'm done with this.
I've had enough of this dude. Yeah. The thing is, like, I feel like the only reason that Jack was able to start seeing the humanity of Lucas and that was able to build their relationship
Mm.
is because Riley saw the humanity
Yes.
of Lucas
So
and someone
true.
else seeing it and allowing him to be more himself rather than a caricature
Yeah.
allowed Jack to see it. And that's when Jack decided maybe this is still worth it. Maybe I should still try. But if Riley had not shown up and he hadn't done that, I think Jack would have given up.
Oh my gosh. So Riley is basically just, again, the most cute, adorable, strongest gal ever.
With her magic powers of just being Riley.
Magic, starlight, and flower power.
Angela has a very interesting moment here of it's like she's defending the techies in a way from Sean of being like they have a shitty instructor, but and I think that that's a little she's genuine. I
Mm,
think she is like it should be frustrating for them, but I think it's also backhanded because
yes.
she's
They're
like
like, two?
they won't formally complain because
They w
they don't
they
speak or
wouldn't
like
know. They, like, don't know anything about what a good teacher would be because they're babies.
right, which is ironic because as we know, like the techies know Sean is a shitty teacher. They just think it's funny. Like they don't really care that
Yeah,
much. And if they do, it's like they banded together
they support
because
it.
their teacher was shitty.
They think, "Hey,
Like,
we're gonna get through this, and if he can make things more chaotic for the performers while he's at it, then so be it.
Yeah, exactly. They're so silly. So then we get into this second sequence here of a big sequence, which is in the cafeteria, which it says is the worst place to be as a new student on your first day.
Definitely.
And Riley is looking for places to sit, and she sees the techies, and they're having they're in eager, fast-paced conversation, but they still seem chaotic. And Lucas is there, and he's scary, and he's glaring at her, and she's like, "No, thank you."
I very much picture
Um,
that, like, he was walking towards them, and then she's like, "Yeah, maybe," because she's, like, seeing Dylan and he looks nice, and then she, like, sees Lucas glaring at her and she just U-turns away. Like, "No."
oh, Lucas. Then she's like, okay, maybe I'll sit where Charlie is. And this is the moment that I wanted to talk about where I think perception is so key
Yes, agreed.
because she sees Charlie she says holding court with a bunch of the sophomores, mainly girls.
Okay, I would love to
And
touch
he
on
seems
mainly girls. Which are the guys? Like, who?
I think it's just people we don't
Yeah.
know, like just other. But it's like it's so funny to me because she sees that and she's seen him before with the girls and her assumption is oh he must be like a and she's got Eric in her head being like
Mm.
ooh like he's got a reputation. To me it's funny because based on what we know about Charlie as a character, I'm sure it's more like Haley and Clarissa sat there
Mhm.
and he sat with them and he just happens to be the only boy sitting at that table, but he's probably like not talking
Yeah.
and like not like he's just sitting there
Yeah.
being like normal
Yeah.
and not holding court. Like he's probably like on the side, like not being
Exactly.
included.
It's probably just that, like, Haley's looking at Charlie and Clarissa's looking at Haley, so it looks like they're all looking at Charlie, and I wrote, "Charlie holding court, I don't believe you." Like,
Yeah, exactly.
what
It's like it's all Riley's perception though.
yeah.
Like it's like if you knew, if she, if Riley in season 3 was walking into this room, she'd be like, "Oh, Charlie's like excluding himself again and like not talking to people and
Yes.
being sad."
Like, "Oh, no," like, "Charlie's overwhelmed as usual."
And it's funny to me too that she says she needs friends, not awkward rejections.
Mm.
So it's hilarious to me that even as she's contemplating this, even if Charlie was gonna flirt with her, she's already like, no, I'm not gonna.
No.
I don't want
Mm-mm.
it.
Not for
It's
me.
so funny to me. She's like, that guy, no,
Uh-uh.
no.
Mr.
Like, girl,
Fluffy
what are you
Hair,
looking for,
she's
Mr.
looking for
Fluffy
someone a
Hair
bit more
Polo?
edgy, a bit more dangerous, maybe?
Edgy, like with a switchblade.
Yeah, that is edgy. A fun, edgy accessory for all young males.
God, I really think it's really, really funny that it's like we
It
know
is.
Charlie so well now that all of this perception of him is like he's got to be so awkward. Like
Yeah.
who's romanticizing him?
There's no way he's holding court because he wouldn't, first of all, he's afraid of talking to big groups of people in a casual way. He can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and he doesn't have the ego to be like, entertain me. Like, tell me things, everyone.
Yeah, it's much more likely that he's half listening to their conversation while he's side eyeing Zay's
Yeah.
table, wishing he was sitting
Yeah.
there.
So
This
true.
poor boy. Oh my goodness. But I also described Lucas in this moment as Lucas having his Edward Cullen moment
Yeah.
of sitting at the cafeteria table looking grumpy
Yeah.
and not eating.
Yeah, and just like stabbing something. I don't remember Twilight, but that's what I picture.
No, yeah, I mean, I think it is noteworthy the fact that he is not eating because I think that we know, based on what we know, it's like he probably doesn't have lunch money
Oh.
and he probably is not packing his own lunch. We know he eats like Oreos in the booth, so it makes sense that he's not eating, but I think it's like there it just seems very edgy. Like, who needs Lunchables?
Yeah. Oh,
I don't eat lunch.
I can so imagine Dylan like noticing that he doesn't buy lunch and then like being like, everyone, like, let's all buy different things for lunch and like put them in the middle and then share and then like Lucas like
Oh,
also
that's so
join in.
cute.
Um and he would at first be like, no, and it would be like, oh, but there's so much. Like, who's gonna eat it all? We need you to help us eat it. And he would just like subtly
Mm-hmm.
find a way. Or he would like start like inviting Lucas over and being like, I have so many snacks. This is so great. Or like, I snuck snacks in. Isn't that fun? And he would try to make it like not about Lucas.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cute. I love that. Canon accepted.
Yay.
Bangs gavel. So yeah, we then move to where Zay and Yindra and Nigel are watching
Mhm.
Riley, and they're kind of, I think, slightly amused by it, but then when Zay kind of waves them off and is like, "Hey, Riley," well, he doesn't say that. I don't, does he know her name? Who knows? But he's like, "Hey, new girl, like, come over here." I think there's this interesting moment where she kind of hesitates,
Yeah.
and I think it's because I think she probably has a fear based on her own former bullying experience that like they might be mean girling her of
Mm,
like, oh, come sit with us, like, oh, so you agree, you think you're really pretty, like, but in reality, we're lucky that it's not that, and
mm,
that they are genuinely nice people, and Zay is a genuinely nice person. But I think she has a little bit of fear there of like, oh, I'm gonna sit down and they're gonna be like, oh, like, your outfit's really cute. So you agree? You think your outfit's really cute?
yeah.
Like, the fact that they invited her to even sit with them is like, what? Do I risk this? But thankfully,
Works out.
it's okay.
It's actually really
And
nice.
he's not evil.
Yeah, the coolest crop of her classmates to her, and she was right, for one.
It's true. They are the coolest
They're
ones.
cool in both senses of the word, in that they're like actually chill, interesting people, but also like popular at the same time. So,
Mm-hmm. I guess it is true too that Eric told her that Zay was voted most popular
yes.
last year. So it's like she's like, why is the most popular boy talking to me?
Yeah. But it's actually because he's super nice.
Yeah, and it's funny too that I just Riley's perception is so funny. It's funny that she's like, "Oh, Charlie looked at me once. He's trying to flirt with me." But then Zay is like, "Hey, how are you?" And she's like, "Oh, this is
This is
fine.
normal.
He's not
He
trying to flirt with
yeah,
me."
it's so bad. It's like, Riley, what are you doing? Like, what?
I think it's really just that like, white boy polo
Mhm.
cute smile thing
Mhm.
that Charlie has going
Yeah.
on. It's like it sets off a little red flag where
Yes.
you're like, "Ooh,
I just
is
wanna
he going to wear salmon shorts?" Like, I'm
yeah.
nervous.
Oh, salmon shorts. It's not it. I found it very notable here that Nigel shakes Riley's hand from the seat next to her. It felt
Mhm.
extremely Nigel, like, no one else is doing that. He's like, "Hello," like, he's almost like milady, but, like, obviously not, 'cause that's, like, super, like, lame and not cute, but, it's like he's, like, so
Yeah, but
traditional in that way.
he's like genuinely like
Yeah.
polite. Like, "Oh, let me shake the new person's hand."
Like, everyone else has just been like, "Oh, we won't touch her, she's new," and he's just like, "Here, shake my hand.
I
Welcome."
love him. He's like the welcome committee.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's he that got added, that was not in the original. And Yindra getting the line about asking if it sucks
Mm.
was originally
Mhm.
Zay's line,
Mhm.
but it was given to her in the rewrite. So I think they're just getting a little, like the techies, they're getting a little bit more space
Mhm. Which is amazing.
since we know they become more important. I wanted to pose a question here
Ooh.
based on what Zay, when he starts talking about dance and he starts talking about how passionate he is, he laments the attitude of Farkle and Maya, claiming he's not like that. He's not like the other divas.
And
Do we think now, 3 seasons in, is that true? Is Zay that different from Farkle and Maya?
no, because first of all, he immediately starts dancing in the cafeteria, for one, and then second of all, he can be sassy and he can be, like, overly motivated and overly ambitious, and so can they, and I
Hmm.
think, yeah, he never got to the extremes of Farkle, but as we know in future episodes, there is a very good reason for him acting in such a manic way. And then, like,
Hmm.
Maya, she's quite cutting, one might say, with her words a lot of the time, but I
Hmm.
think she has other reasons to be defensive, and,
Yeah.
Zay has reasons to try keep everyone in a good like, keep thinking of him in a good light,
Yes.
but I think Maya, she has reasons to also try to put up these walls, so in a way
Hmm.
that they're just doing the same thing, but just different
Yeah.
methods.
And I think it's interesting too that we see in later seasons, like we see true diva Zay,
Mm.
and we see that side of him come out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's just, I think the one key distinction that is true is that Maya says it in, I think, season 3, that like the key difference is that Zay is more socially inclined. He's very particular about his network.
Mm-hmm.
He's very thoughtful about how are people perceiving me.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be someone that people feel like they can connect with
Mm-hmm.
and go to. So he's very socially driven in a way that I think Farkle wants to be that way, but he can't figure out how.
No.
He has the whole thing about I want a team, I want a team. He just sucks at it, and he has to like overcome that and learn how to get that social charm. Whereas Maya, I think that's the main difference between them, is that she doesn't really care about that, or she thinks she doesn't care about that.
But she actually does. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, I think we see that a little bit with her relationship with Farkle, that she maybe cares more than she thinks she does. And I will say, ring the bell, that that is something that we will also be continuing to explore as the show goes on.
Ooh.
Is what is Maya's actual level of commitment to these things, and how much does she actually care? Because it's very easy to be blasé and nonchalant when you know you're going to see these people every day,
Mm,
Like when you're stuck in school. When that
yeah,
changes, how does that change?
that's a great point.
So then we have the 5th song, Dancing on the Sidewalk
Yes.
from Fame. I This is not my favorite performance, but I think it is the most, it's not my favorite performance in the fact that like the song is not my favorite. It's not like that deep, but I think it is super fun, and I think it's very ambition in the fact that it's like, here we go, big group number in the cafeteria. Like we're really getting into it
Yeah,
now.
that's true. I would say the same. I try not listening to the Fame soundtrack. I'm not a huge fan. Just a bit much for me, but um
Yeah, I can say that the Fame soundtrack is like, I like songs on it,
yeah,
clearly, because they're in the show. It's just, it's kind of a silly musical, to be completely
it
honest.
is.
It's like taking itself too seriously half the time and then not seriously enough
Yeah.
the rest of the time. So I think, like, as a show, it is not great,
Hmm.
but to recontextualize certain numbers has been very effective. Like, I think like the teacher's argument and the songs that Jack and Eric do from the show, I think fit really well, because that perspective of being a teacher in a school like this
Mm-hmm.
is authentic and feels nuanced. But I mean, yeah, there's parts of this, it feels very like 80s, 90s. And maybe in the Ambition version, if we could actually hear it, it would be even
It
cooler.
would. It probably would be great. It would be kind of like how Glee versions of songs are actually better.
Sometimes, yeah, yeah.
Not most, but some.
Yeah, so I noted here that I think it's in the rewrite, so not in the original, but in the rewrite, Charlie gets a little more of an explicit feature regarding the fact that he
Mm.
dances. So, because originally it said just like, oh, we have this, everyone's dancing, blah, 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 and Charlie's also featured, and that's all it said. Whereas here, it's a little more specific about he's featured in the dancing,
Yeah.
and it shows that he has strong capability as a dancer. And I think that it's important to make that distinction,
Hmm.
because, as we know, that is kind of his performing calling card.
It is.
And it's interesting that he, sure eagerly jumps into a
Yeah,
number started by Zay.
exactly.
It's kind of intriguing.
Ooh, his eyes are open.
The techies react in annoyance, which is really funny, because I feel like, as we know, as the seasons go on, that's going to change, where they stop being annoyed by it
Yeah,
and they just start joining
this
in.
is actually just
Um,
teen angst.
Except for Lucas. I think
Oh,
Lucas, I believe that he is fed up and is like, I am so over this bullshit.
yeah.
And I can really easily, one of my favorite parts of this number is I can so well visualize the camera kind of weaving with Lucas following through the dancing,
Hmm.
where it's like he's not the focus of the camera,
Yeah,
but we can see him creeping his way out
right.
and like then going to cause his mischief. And the way that like Issa is like, no, don't, like, don't do anything, it's fine, and he goes anyway, and then she looks at Jade and Asher and is like, fuck. Like they know that he's gonna go cause some bullshit, but
Mm,
what are they gonna do about it? Nothing.
yeah, then it's the best. One of the best moments of all moments in the series, I think.
That moment of pulling out your lighter and setting off the fire alarm.
So good. And it douses them all in mucky water, which sounds disgusting, actually.
It is really disgusting. It's never happened to me, but I have had a friend who had it happen to them,
Oh,
that like the sprinklers went off, and it's gross water. Like it's not like, ooh, this is the clean water
Oh,
that you get out of the tap. Like it's like sewer system water because
oh,
it's this that's the water that you need in a split second, you know? Like it
yeah.
doesn't have to be nice, but
Oh.
if nothing's wrong and you're just standing under it, like it's not a pleasant experience.
Huh, I never knew that. I mean, I guess I kinda figured it wouldn't be, like, the nicest of nice, but it always just looks, like, normal in movies. It just looks
In shows, yeah,
yeah.
right. Or people like do not seem bothered by the fact that they're standing under it, but it's like not pleasant. You would not be not bothered.
Yeah, that would really annoy me.
A little fun fact, when I wrote this, to write this little part of transition, I literally listened to a fire alarm on YouTube.
Oh,
I Googled fire alarm sound effect and just listened to it for like 2 minutes. So I had that like very clear transition of like the end of the Dance on the Sidewalk where it's like dun dun dun, and then it goes like straight into a fire alarm. Like that's very like locked in my head right now
wow,
because of
commitment.
me putting myself through
Yeah.
that. A little piece here that also got added in this version, in the updated version, is that in the original version, it was just like techies got excited and it was like, yay. And now we have a little detail about Dylan and Asher and what they're
Mm,
doing in that moment, which was not in the original,
mhm.
but I had that visual in my head. And I think it's a good little just character moment for both of them. Like, oh, Dylan thinks this is really funny and really silly and is
Yeah.
picking on Asher about it, where Asher looks disgusted.
Mhm.
Like, can you know Asher now? Like, can you imagine this disgusting water all over
He
him?
is not pleased. He's like, "I need to go home. Like, I'm not staying for the rest of the
Yeah.
day."
Literally. I mean, it's this is the first step of like the struggle of being Lucas James Fryer's best friend is he's going to put you through this and you just have to take it
Yeah, I
until
mean
the moment you can't take it
yeah,
anymore.
and other things. Yeah, I mean, I honestly think Asher would be, like, so nervous to come back to school after summer, and then this happens on the first day, and he's like he goes home and he's like, "I don't think I can do it, Dylan. I don't think I can do
Yeah.
it. I think I'm transferring."
He's like, Riley's in, I'm out. I got to go. But no, he's got his own dream,
Yeah.
so he can't go yet.
Mm.
Then Zay just says, "Welcome to Adams," as if that's how the shit goes, and Riley's like,
Uh,
you're joking."
this cannot
This is
happen. And for the
right. This is
next
so much better than what I just left.
she's like, "Okay, so I'm wet, but we got to sing and no one's bullying me. But I'm also like, yeah, I'm very wet now. I'm damp.
And I'm a little scared of everyone.
People have knives, but also we sang."
People have knives and the potential to flirt with me when I don't want them to flirt with me. So then we go into this scene where the girls are fixing their hair and getting changed into different clothes, which is the truth, is like thankfully at least they're at an art school where they have changes of clothes
Yeah.
for like different classes, and it's like, okay, at least you're not gonna have to sit in that all day. I also feel like technically if we're talking about realism, I'm pretty sure if the sprinkler system went off, like
You would just leave.
the fire department would like, yeah, they'd have to come and like clean it out and like turn it all off. So like in reality they probably would have just gone home and school would have closed early that day,
But
but this is TV,
yeah.
so we don't have to think about that. So in this scene, one of my favorite lines that I think is almost like cheesy, but I like it, is when Yindra says, "It wasn't a fire, it was Fryer."
Yeah.
I love the rhyme, the little rhyme scheme, and I love
Really
Riley
nice.
being like, "What the fuck does that mean?"
She's like, "Okay, and?" Like, that doesn't help.
She's like, "That means nothing to me," but she's sure gonna learn what that means,
This would
Mr.
be
Fryer.
so overwhelming for your first day, but also, like, kinda good. Like, I feel like you would slightly bond with everyone quite quickly in this sort of situation. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the next day you're like, how did it go? Like, is your hair okay?" It's kind of a good conversation starter.
Yeah. Then they all are talking shit about him. It's very clear there's some animosity.
Mhm.
I think Sarah is the worst when she says he's the definition of white trash.
Mm.
Because that's just
It's just not
rude.
nice.
That's really mean. And Riley, doesn't know enough at this point to counter. But then you have Issa jump in.
She
Issa
goes
says, "Well,
off.
maybe if you didn't, yeah, maybe if you didn't sing and dance every lunch and stop us from enjoying our break from you singing and dancing every class, he wouldn't need to do this stuff." So I think we see a little bit of the brother sister power dynamic there of
Mhm.
I got your back even when you're not here.
And then we get this iconic scene, this cultural
Yes.
moment of history where it is the first Jack and Lucas scene. extremely
Yes.
important.
I wrote I wrote best in the ep question mark because
Yeah.
I would argue
Ooh.
maybe it's my favorite scene, I think, brief as it is.
It is really good. Like Jack's being firm, he's being clear, he's not being harsh. Like he's doing his job. And then Lucas is just like, I'm so smart and you know nothing. And so that's really funny, but also there's something there that's very intriguing. I think it's probably the most intriguing dynamic that we get to see to some degree.
Yeah, like I mean right from the start, it's definitely true. I think you kind of said it a little bit, but I think what the scene demonstrates, this is the most that we see Lucas talk. I think he didn't this is actually I think the first time he talks in the episode.
Yeah.
And it's no one else is around obviously, but I think it goes to show like everyone's saying like Lucas sucks and he doesn't care about anything, and if you're thinking about stereotypes you're thinking like, oh, he must be like a burnout or
Yeah.
like just doesn't give a shit, maybe isn't good at school. But I think what this shows, the fact that we know he doesn't talk much, and I think that is true, but this scene and typically scenes with Jack, I think he's really actually quite smart and
Yeah.
quite articulate, and he's just much smarter than I think he comes off as.
Mm-hmm.
And the way he has this rapport where he's so effortlessly like, you can't prove it. No, you don't have anything on me. It kind of shows that in a way that's subtle, but just it's just the way he speaks. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's so interesting that he always is thinking, I can't talk, I don't know how to talk, I can't socialize. But when he does talk, he's quite eloquent.
He is. Yeah, I think I remember us talking about this like probably way back when, but Lucas is somehow terrible with words, but at the same time extremely eloquent.
Yeah, I think it's that when the words really matter, he struggles a lot because he doesn't know what the right thing to say is,
Mm,
particularly if it's very emotional. Like I think, we see him struggle to articulate himself with Riley sometimes. We see him struggle to articulate himself with Jack when the
mm,
moments are more
mhm,
serious. But I think when the stakes are lower, or when it's like the stakes don't feel personal, like when he's running for president or when
mhm,
he's like just kind of in an argument that's not about him,
mm,
he shows that he really is capable with his speech. It's just that when the stakes feel high, he kind of chokes.
yeah. I also just love how it's not just his words that are smart, but like the fact that he just knew how to set off the fire alarm and like had this idea and went and did it. And then there's just so many examples of him kind of figuring stuff out and
Mm-hmm.
being kind of hands-on, smart, and witty and, like, quippy as well.
Yes, I that line that I highlighted here is his final line where he goes, "All due respect, Principal Hunter, all you have is circumstantial evidence and confirmation bias. So unless you have anything else to add, I really should get back to class so I can listen to Farkle make a squawk for yet another jolly day in this wonderful, wonderful institution to higher learning." Like that's a smart boy.
And that was the moment that I decided to stan.
Yeah. That is not a boy who is burnt
No,
out. There's a brain in there that is very active.
he knows exactly what he's doing to all our heart, and it is melting them.
And yeah, I think I just love the fact that we see, like I said, we see Jack kind of being like, so what else do I do? I'm so frustrated with this.
Yeah,
We see that angle to it, but we also see that there is a long history there now of he must have been doing this for 2 years with this kid,
yeah.
which is annoying as hell. So it's like it seems doomed almost from the start, but we'll see
Mm,
how that goes. Then I have just this note here about when Jack. This is when Jack goes to the hallway and he hangs right around the hall where Eric is talking with other
mm.
teachers who are obviously understandably upset about the sprinkler situation, but Eric is really happy to pin the blame on Jack and he is ready to just jump down his throat and be like it's all his fault, which is like again, it's that thing of like, oh, this is all behind his back. So it's very yikes.
Mm.
Like, oh my goodness,
Eric.
Eric. But I think it's interesting that it says he sympathizes with the complaints of the fellow faculty before insisting that it all comes down to leadership at the end of the day. And I think that what's very interesting about Eric here is the way that the exact same stuff he's doing here is what Yancey does in season 3 towards
Ooh,
Jack. And suddenly it's like the tables are flipped. It's like you used to do this shit because you wanted Jack on. And now you've come around on that and you see why Jack is the good leader that he is and someone else is doing it and it
yeah.
really bothers you.
That is so true. It's also interesting because he's talking about leadership, and as we know, he has leadership qualities, but also he is the counselor. So shouldn't he have counseled the rebellious streak out of Lucas at this point? You know?
Ooh.
Mm,
Turning the tables a little bit there.
maybe.
You gotta talk some shit about him, Maddie. You gotta
Yeah,
get in the teacher's lounge and
I will.
deliver some antics. So then Jack chooses not to make a scene smartly because he's a genius. And
Hmm.
he just lets it go and moves on, but it's clearly going to bother him. And that night, Riley has dinner with Corey and Topanga, and it's awkward, and they do not seem like super happy lovey Corey and Topanga. And this is interesting in that this scene where it says, Topanga gives her the realist approach of how to approach her performance. That kind of plays on, which we'll talk about this a lot more throughout the show, but there's a very big theme that S and I have included in this show that is mainly within the relationships, like the romances, but it's kind of overall as well of this balance of realism versus dreaming and realist versus dreamer, and how you need a good balance of both. It has to be a compatible balance, but you need both
Hmm.
sides of that to really function in life. And here, what we're seeing with Corey and Topanga is Corey is a hyper dreamer and Topanga is a hyper realist. And so they can't really meet in the middle. And Riley is torn in that middle. Whereas the ideal thing you want is for there to be compromise and understanding in the middle. And that is what Corey and Topanga do not have, is the middle ground. So that's just kind of
Ooh.
this beginning, very subtle introduction to that. And I think we see that a little bit as well with Jack and Eric in this episode of Jack is the realist and this is how real life is and this is how we have to deal with it. And Eric is clearly the dreamer. And we're seeing those frictions throughout the season, the first season. But then as we know, like it's not that if you don't have middle ground initially, it doesn't mean you'll never get it. It's just about
Mm.
can you change yourself and can you find the right balance? Whereas, as we know, Topanga's a narcissist, so she's not going to ever change herself. So,
Yeah.
but that is just one of our major themes: is realist versus dreamer. So then we have Jack and Sean. This is a brand new scene. It was not in the original pilot of them having their little dinner together, and Jack kind of finally snapping and finally breaking rather than keeping up the authoritarian facade of having everything under control.
And that he does. He's actually, I do have to care. It's my job. He's so, it is quite brotherly, I suppose, that he snaps in front of Sean
Mm-hmm.
because siblings.
Yes, that's definitely true. And the fact that Sean is part of his problem is that Sean is clearly,
Mm,
he was given this job. It was basically a nepotism hire, and he's not taking it
mhm,
seriously. It's like, that looks
mhm,
bad on me if you're going to be shitty about it. But I think
mhm,
I highlighted what I think is kind of the core of it here. And then I think is kind of a theme throughout the first season, throughout the show of they think the job is so simple, so easy. File some paperwork, discipline a kid when necessary, keep things in order. But that's harder than it sounds. Of course, Eric thinks he has it all figured out. He's the good guy. He gets to be the faculty favorite, telling the kids exactly what they want to
mhm,
hear, while Jack has to be the realist. He has to deliver the hard truths, the punishment and probabilities, to step in and keep things in order, even when it feels like everything is constantly in chaos. And I think that it sums up Jack's characterization at the beginning here, and also, again, pulls back to that dreamer realist thing. I think there's also an interesting kind of potential parallelism between Sean and Lucas in Jack's life. Not yet,
Oh,
of course, but it jumped out to me when Jack is saying, I'm not asking you to do my job, it's my shit and I'll deal with it. I always do. But I'm bending over backwards for you and you have to meet me in the middle. If I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure he says something almost exactly similar to that in season 2 to Lucas.
whoa. Meet me in the middle. He should sing me that song by Maren Morris.
I think that
Baby.
the stakes for Jack and Lucas, I think, feel higher because, with Sean is like, first of all, it's your brother. So it's like, okay, it's not just, it's just different when you argue with your sibling. But it's also the thing of like, Sean's a grown adult and Sean is at a point in his life where he can kind of make his own decisions and he's past the point where he can like royally fuck up everything. Whereas I think for Lucas, Jack really feels a responsibility for him after a certain point. It just feels more intense. It's like it's different when it's your brother messing up versus your kid messing up. So I think it's interesting the ways that they parallel, but also the ways that the relationships are so different that it feels different.
Just so many good points here right now. My brain is expanding.
I think it shows that Jack cares when it seems like maybe when
Mm-hmm.
he's authoritative that he didn't, or that he was able to be removed from it,
Yes.
when in reality, he cares a lot. It's a little bit like, not to draw more parallelisms, but it's a little bit like Lucas in that, Lucas always says, when I care about something, you'll know. And he acts like he doesn't care and he acts like it's above it all. But it's actually the fact that he cares too much that makes it
Mm-hmm.
also difficult. And I think Jack is a little bit like that as well.
Yeah. He's trying to stop himself from getting too invested at times because it just feels too out of his control.
Yeah. So then Corey comes to say goodnight to Riley and they talk about her song that she's going to
Very
do.
cute.
And he gives the opposite of Topanga, like the very dreamer, follow your heart, like do what makes you feel good and be yourself. And Riley's like, okay, thanks. This is also when we learn that Riley was bullied at her former school, and that's why she moved. It was not just a choice to go sing a lot.
Mm.
And that takes us right into her performance, which is Your Song, which was originally performed by Elton John. And we did the Ellie Goulding
Yes.
version because it sounds more like Riley. But the
Yes.
original version is also amazing. So no hate at all.
It's important to note that we do not diss Elton. We just needed a song
Right.
for
Never.
Riley.
I would never diss him. I even said in my note, like, it's like they all kind of act like, oh, this is okay, what a performance, meh. But this song slaps. So all the divas
It's
being
so
like,
good.
like, shut up. You're dramatic and annoying.
Yeah. Like if you can't entertain with a slow, soft song as well, are you doing a good job, Maya Farkle? No.
Literally. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so then, everyone else is like, oh, it's like nice. And Lucas, it's like, oh, it looks like he doesn't care, but he's also like not
Yeah.
looking away. I said, he acts like he doesn't care, but this song got stuck in his head like for the rest of the week.
Oh yes.
And he was like,
Mhm.
why is this song stuck in my head? And it's like, I don't know. Why is that song stuck in your head? Where do you think you heard it?
Yeah, I think he is kept awake at night with the song going in his head, and he, like, tries to get it out, and then he just, like, sees the image of Riley singing it, and he's like, "Ah, what is happening? Ah."
He's like, what does it mean? Oh my God, I'm dying.
Yeah,
Probably.
like, not to overstate, but cultural reset when he looks neutral to her song.
Yeah, exactly. Period. So then she gets like a nice lukewarm reception. It's like, yeah, okay, great. I wrote in my notes here, Charlie is so embarrassing because he goes up to her and he's like, hey, I really like that performance. And to me, it's funny again, it comes back to Riley's perception because she's like a
Yeah.
little uncomfortable. She's like, I don't know if he's like flirting or if he just did like it and wanted to be nice, but why would he do that? And the thing is, I'm like, I think he really probably genuinely was just like, hey, I liked your song. But
Yeah.
he has such a anxious energy that I feel like he's projecting like something shifty when it's like he's just not, but he can't, as he always says, he's like a Martian and can't function. And I think that
Yeah.
Riley's picking up on that, but picking up on it in the wrong way.
He's so desperately trying to seem casual that it comes off like he's trying to be, like, edgy almost, like he's trying to be like, "Oh, like, yeah, I guess it was, like, cool, but
He's
I really
like,
liked it."
yeah, he's
But
like,
and she's
hey,
like, "What is he saying?"
he's like, hey, nice song. I liked it. And she's like, what is happening?
"Oh,
It's
what is he trying to say?"
it's kind of sad too though, because I feel like we know that Charlie's gonna have a very complicated relationship with Riley in this season, and he's gonna make some choices that aren't great. But I feel like there is just a thing too that we know, like he does struggle to make friends, like genuine friends, and I
Mm,
feel like this is a little bit of him like trying to be like, this person seems nice. Like Zay can do it where he can just talk to people and be nice to them. I'm gonna do it too, and then it just does not
mm,
go the way he wants it to. This
no.
poor boy, this poor embarrassing child. Speaking of embarrassing children, Lucas's reaction is also embarrassing, where he's like, they're both left, it's just the two of them. Riley's like, oh, do I say something? Like, it's kind of awkward, we're just here. Well, Lucas beats her to it, And he says, so exciting
Mm.
to see we've got another unassuming course member. Which is like, first of all,
Well, well, well.
King, you didn't even sing, so why are you judging her? But second, it's like I'm just in Lucas's head. I'm sure he's like, we're both standing here. I don't know what I feel. I kind of want to say something. Let me insult her real quick. Okay, I
Oh,
nailed
yeah.
it. Great. I said something. I did
Woo,
it. Whew, got it. And it's like, oh, King,
done.
that's, oh boy.
Mm, so close, but so far.
But you know what? You know what? This is going a little deep. This is going a little meta.
Ooh.
And maybe it's not 100% true, but let's think about the fact his only, aside from Dasher, forget Dasher, his only example
Hmm.
of a couple is his parents. And
Oh,
I am sure that his parents, more often than not, interact with snide comments like that.
oh my
So
gosh.
I don't think that he is doing it to flirt. I don't think he's being like conscious of that, but it's like if that's all he's internalized his whole life, it's maybe it's a little not
Wow.
surprising that that's the only thing he can think of to say is something snide.
So you're saying he doesn't know how to healthily express his emotions? Yes.
Well, maybe a little bit, just a tad.
Especially those that are somewhat affectionate.
Or somewhat just I don't think he even I think at this point he
He doesn't
doesn't feel
know.
much of
Yeah.
anything, but I think he also just like, and we see this in season one a little bit, I think, when he gets all flustered, it's like he doesn't even know what it is. He's like, I don't know
Yeah.
how to react to this. I don't know. Am I
Yeah.
scared? Am I like, I don't know.
Like he's not used to feeling something that isn't just like hate and derision. Like he's used to that for like his friends, but now he's like, but this doesn't really feel like that.
Yeah, I think you're right that it's like he's used to just being very apathetic to things that aren't already in
Mm,
his circle. And so for this to appear and
yeah.
to him to be like, why can't I get this song out of my head? Why can't I look away from this boring performance that I don't care about? I think he's confused. There's confusion. And
I see it.
that's on embarrassing boys from day one.
There they are. Speaking of, just a little Farkelmeyer embarrassing fight actually was pretty, funny and it's very them. And kind of amazing that they just from day one are just like crazy at each other's throats.
Yes. I think to me what's very telling about it is the fact that it implies Farkle's outside the dressing rooms writing in a journal until Maya walks out, and it implies this thing
Mm-hmm.
that he's like, I'm going to wait here until Maya comes
Yeah,
out so I can verbally attack her for fun.
yeah,
And I think it kind of goes to show though, like Farkle is so desperate for like attention, and I think that
yeah,
he knows he'll get it from Maya by doing that.
yeah.
And it's
So
almost like
true.
this weird like puppy thing of he's like, I have to wait for
Mm,
my I could go home, but I'm gonna sit here and wait for Maya so that I can have my banter with her and then I can go home. Like he's already like so attached to her, even though he doesn't consciously, to him he's like, oh, it's derision, it's a rivalry. It's like, no, you
yeah,
just like having
you're
attention from
obsessed.
her. Although her comment that she makes, she says, oh, is daddy gonna buy it for you? Think he could buy you some friends first. That's
Eat,
stone cold.
truly.
She's not
Like
wrong, but
his is like, okay, like I'm gonna get the things that you want, but he's just saying like I'm getting them, but she's just like straight up like you don't have any friends. Like,
this
so
is
enjoy.
we're relearning that ambition is the story of embarrassing boys that don't have friends. Is
Yeah, there's too many. There's a lot of them.
too many boys with too many embarrassing lack of friendships, all for their own reasons too, which is even
Yeah,
sadder. Um,
yeah.
so yeah, Riley does not feel great after the performance. She's like, well, do I really have what it takes? And she goes back and she revisits the advertisement from the opening. And that's something that, of course, is
Mm,
new to this because it didn't exist in the original one.
hmm.
But I think it works well as a way to tie it back and, kind of give us a
Oh
closed
yeah.
circle for this pilot.
Oh yeah. I wrote that in my notes.
Yeah.
It's a nice a round ending.
And it kind of brings back, I mentioned at the beginning, like, oh, there's a line I really like, and it's because it's thematic. And those are the ones that it gets brought back to, is the ones that were most important from that video, are the ones that come back.
You get to see everyone like to each one, which is just a really cool way of showing off these like final sketches of each character.
Yes. And that's how we come to the one reprise finale, a great song from a great musical. But it overskirts what we talked about, that third installment of this triad of looking at these characters. And I think what we see here, like we said, is the behind the door version of them. What are the
Mm,
little
yeah.
details that we're learning that are hidden from everybody else? With Maya, that is her poverty existence, that she is not as glamorous and first class as she appears.
Yeah, and that's a big reveal because I imagine her to be extremely glitzy
Mm-hmm.
and put together, and then that just immediately gives her this other sort of look. Like with Zay, it's kind of like like it's a little bit, but it's more like okay, like we just know where he lives now.
Yeah, I think with Zay, it almost, the lack of something like that, almost kind of his point is that he is authentic, and what everybody else is getting for the most part is what he really is. Whereas he's like the only character that's like that, where it's like he's very upfront about who he is.
Yeah, which is his power. Mhm.
Charlie's here for someone who really only existed in the pilot to make Riley feel awkward because he's awkward. Is quite packed with a lot of little
Mm.
details. We have
Oh
the
yeah.
fact that he's got this house full of sisters who we know nothing about at this point, but as we know, we're going to learn a lot about them in the future. And you got the overbearing mother who's smothering him, making sure he looks perfect. There's the proud father in the distance, and of course the crucifix on the wall. I will say a little fun fact for those who now know the Gardner children. The younger sister that I visualized who bumped him out of the bathroom and was like, screw you, basically, is Rosie.
Mm.
So
Oh good.
if you can picture that, that's who is kicking him out of the bathroom. It's not even really kicking him out, it's just that he's going towards the bathroom and she like nerfs him and is like, nope, I'm going to the bathroom. So sucks to suck, Charlie.
You know what? It's fine. He goes to a school where they have like locker rooms and mirrors and stuff. So he'll be fine.
It's also funny, like when Eleanor is wiping the smudge from his cheek, I'm like, where did he get a smudge? Like, what is he doing? But I'm like, honestly, he's probably just like laying down in the dirt outside is the answer.
Probably. Like he probably just went for like a morning forage in the forest to like write some poetry.
And just laid on the Central Park grass for a little bit
Yeah.
to decompress and then had to go back to the real world. So I believe
Yeah.
it. I 100% believe that's what he was doing.
No, it's ink from like putting his Bible so close to his face
He was
and
hugging his
crying.
Bible at
Yeah.
sleep, and then he woke up and he had to leave his poor Bible. So then we see Issa. We get the introduction to the foster home, which is a totally
Mm.
different setting than everybody else's.
Yeah, I actually forget. I don't associate Issa with that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's kind of a wild thing to go back to.
Well, I think
Like
she's
12 other children. Oh my
yeah,
goodness.
she's definitely, I think, shifted the most out of everybody in terms of like constantly jumping around between
Mm,
what is my space, you know?
yeah. Definitely. Like Charlie's bedroom is like the same the whole time,
Mm-hmm.
whereas Issa is like every season she's like in a different room, sometimes multiple in the season.
That's true. I mean, Riley too, her bedroom changes because she and Maya end up in the master bedroom. So it's like
Yeah,
that
which
set
sounds weird when you
changes.
say it without context, I must say.
That set changes. Issa's sets change. But Charlie, Zay, no, Maya, because Maya moves around a lot. Farkle has the
Mm.
safe space the entire time. So it's kind of like the people who are a little more stable in their home lives
Yeah,
are the
seems
ones that
so.
don't. Yeah, so then we have Lucas, and he's not at
Mm.
home. He's already at school. He's in the booth very early in the morning, flossing his
Oh,
teeth, which I
what
think is a
is
nice little
the choice?
detail. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's hygienic, but also he's doing this in the booth. So is it hygienic?
I think that is kind of, it's funny because I feel like something that I would always do when I was writing, like one of my other main projects at this time was All the Lonely People, which is a
Mm.
Riley and Lucas story. And in that, like, Lucas is a drifter. And even in that, though, I was like, he's a drifter, but he cares about hygiene. So I feel like this is just something that I've like picked up, is that Lucas may be shady and he may be a drifter and he may be a little,
Mhm.
I wouldn't trust him, but does he smell good? Yes. Are his teeth clean? Yes. So just in case anyone
He's
was
just
worried,
still the perfect man for Riley.
because he's got great teeth. I also think it's like good for him, because if you're, in the
Yeah.
home that he grew up in, I'm sure that no one cared about that for him. So him like kind of taking hygiene
No.
into his own hands is very like, oh dad, you're not
Yeah.
gonna send me to the dentist? Well, I'm gonna floss my teeth anyway. So
Ha. Ha ha ha.
ha ha ha. Then we have Farkle. I think his moment, I think, actually is like the most interesting character wise. I think everybody else
Yeah.
is very much like, this is their situation, these are their circumstances. Whereas
Yeah.
Farkle, just that image of like, clearly he lives in a very comfortable situation. He should have nothing to be upset about. But this thing of like over and over again practicing this grin, it's a little manic. It's a little like you're taking that way too seriously.
Yeah.
But it is also just like, why are you practicing that so much? Like, shouldn't that be something that's natural, you know?
Yeah. It's a little like pathological,
Yeah.
but
So then we get back to the school. We have that moment again of Riley is outside looking at the building, but this time she's ready. She's gonna march
yes.
right on in there. And we get right to the end. We're in the singular sensation. Every little step she takes, it's great. We got some great choreography, some great music. It's going. And we are getting kind of the sense of what this is going to be like in terms of these performances. This is what they do every day, is they're doing this kind of performing. The piece that got added that I really love is that we now see Jack in this ending situation as well. And he's just enjoying the performance and sitting there and watching these kids do what they're good at and what they really
Mm-hmm.
enjoy. And even though he's stressed and he has so much to do, he's just taking a moment to be like, this is nice. Look how hard they're working. Look at that. And I think that that speaks really to his heart in a way. Why does he do it? Why
Yeah.
does he care so much? It's because he likes to make a difference in the lives of these
He
children.
actually loves it. Yeah.
And I think maybe
Beautiful.
it becomes easy to forget that as we are in all of these different
Mm.
situations, but I think that it's true. And that's kind of at the core at the beginning here, is we can see that he does love it. Welcome to Adams
Beautiful.
Indeed. This is it. Bam. End of
Bam.
pilot. So now we've made it. It's the
Ooh,
pilot. It's a very
we did
long
it.
episode for us to talk about it. I think that this episode generally, it's gonna be, well, I'm not gonna speak for season 3 because who knows what season 3 is gonna be like, but I think this will be a longer episode because of the fact that we were talking about two different episodes in a way and how they compared to each other.
Yes, and then also the fact that it's like the first one, so we're like,
Yes.
oh, it's so interesting. Yeah, like when you get into the thick of it, there's not so many times where you're like, oh, like they're so different.
Right, that's exactly what I was gonna say. It's like a pilot episode is like, there's a lot to talk about, where it's like, how was everything set up? But as we go on, I think
Yes.
that'll be a little less present. So, is there any sort of, what was your feeling and your opinion on rereading this after 2 years? I guess 1 year if you read the revamp.
I'd say, I mean, I reread the revamp and then I also reread it, I think, before season 2. So I've actually read it probably the most times. It is I'm glad that when you first posted it, it wasn't too long because I, as you know, am slow reader
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not like huge on like finding content to read online. So it probably would have put me off if it was a lot longer.
Mm-hmm.
I probably would have been like, I don't know, this is gonna take me so long." But I'm glad that I did, and I'm glad that you revamped it because it does add so much, and I much prefer all these little additions, especially with the knowledge of what's to come.
Yes. Yeah.
It was yeah, it's good. It's like it's very tense, like I said earlier, and it's somehow very vague, but at the same time, it's setting up a lot of little things to sort of be trigger points for later.
Mm-hmm. And we will definitely hit all of them. It's interesting to me, and I appreciate that you mentioned the idea of the length. And it's like, oh, in a way, I guess that's good then. Because I feel like maybe a lot of people
Mm,
felt a little similarly of like, if I'm just trying this
mhm.
new thing out, how do I want to do I want to commit to this? And I think it's a little schema in a way of like, okay, well, we'll just rope you guys in with a few episodes that are under
Mhm.
10K, not too long, really easy to read. And now we're in season 3. It's like, here's your 50K episode. Enjoy. But, at this point, it's like you're invested and you really care about them. So
Yes,
we've kind
exactly.
of roped in your trust. And now we're really taking advantage of that. But
It's okay, we don't mind anymore.
anymore. But yeah, was there a favorite performance, a favorite moment, a favorite character? What stood out for you?
What stood out for me was definitely Jack and also Lucas. And that said, the standout scene of Jack and Lucas together.
Mm-hmm.
And then the performances, I'd say for me, it's like not like there's not that many, is there? But my favorites are the ones that Riley sings.
Interesting. There's definitely comparatively to later episodes, there's not a lot of songs, especially since High School Never Ends is an instrumental.
Mm,
Typically now we average about there's 7 in this episode, and we typically average now, I'd say 10 to 13 an episode. So
yeah.
it's definitely, I mean, with the episodes growing, it has definitely grown with it.
Mm-hmm.
I would say Changes is a great one. I wrote a little ranking of the performances for myself.
Ooh.
My number one, and maybe this will be unsurprising, is Man About Town, is the Farkle number.
Mm-hmm. Not surprised.
Just because I again, like, I love that it'll come back later and it's a little bit of a kind of core for him. Then I go Changes number 2, Dancing on the Sidewalk number 3, because of the fact that it is so ambition. Number
Yeah.
4, High School Never Ends, for the concept of it. Number 5, Wizard and I, although I think if Farkle had performed Wizard and I think it would have been higher because, again, of that lyrical
Ooh,
thing.
yeah.
Number 6 is One. And listen, I just want to put my defense of One out there. I think it's a great song. And I think to me, it will always feel very quintessential Ambition because of where it is, where it's at the end of the pilot.
Yeah.
But compared to everything else that's going on in the pilot, I don't think it really has enough time to be
No.
like, oh, this is the best performance ever. And then last, unfortunately, is Your Song for me. Just because it's not the best Riley could do. And we know that. But I do love the song itself, out of the context of the episode.
Okay. So we have complete opposites. Got
A little bit. I
it.
mean, Changes is up there for both of us,
Yes,
but
true.
as that first song. My favorite scene also, as well, as I mentioned, was the Jack and Lucas scene. And the main other takeaway for me is that Charlie is embarrassing. I wrote that so many times that I was like, that's the point.
I think the main takeaway for me was how tense the episode was, and that is something I will be looking at, the tone and mood I feel from the episode
Hmm.
going forward.
That'll be very interesting. I think that there's
Mm.
definitely some variety, so I'm excited.
Yeah, me too.
All right, well, we did it. We made it through our first
We did
official
it.
episode. Hopefully this will be interesting, and if it's 3 hours, that's okay. As usual, as we will say to the people, you can reach us at any of the places we're usually found. Our Tumblr, Ambition Source, the Instagram, the Ambition Source. We're gonna be on our YouTube now, which is where we're posting these, so you can comment there. Tell us about your experience of the
Mhm,
pilot, your experience of when you
mhm,
first read it, and if you reread it,
mhm.
how does it feel? And is there any questions you have about 102, and are you excited
Yeah,
for it?
let's go.
So, heck yeah. All right, we don't have a sign off yet,
We do not.
but I guess we can just say, welcome to Adams. This is it.
This is Adams, indeed.
This is it. Woo! All
Woo!
right. Goodbye.
Bye.